For the committee, I'll do attendance now. Good evening, everyone. Okay, Chuck Merdler, you're here. Marty Wolpoff,
Marty's here.
Sylvia
Marty,
Alexander.
where'd you go to?
Sylvia?
Would I go where?
Oh, okay.
Oh.
We're
She
just
was
doing
calling.
attendance, Marty.
I know.
Okay. Sylvia? Bob Bender? Paul Ellis? David Gauman?
Present.
Rosemary Ginty?
Present.
Marvin Goodman? Dan Paternak?
Here.
Tracy Pardo? Julie Reyes?
Julie will not be able to attend.
You are right. Camelia Tepulis? Omar Murray? We are one short of a quorum, Chuck.
All right, we should have somebody aboard pretty soon.
I'm not a member of the committee, but I'm here. Susan Chasky.
Thank you.
You know
Happy-
what? I'm gonna call Marvin.
Okay,
Who's here representing the NYPD?
We've got
Hello,
Lieutenant Anthony Andriano, Detective Dean Adagnostis from NYPD Facilities Management.
Okay,
Yeah, steal it.
I understand you've requested to be first on, and so you shall be.
Wonderful. Why, thank you.
I will share my screen for you guys. Just let me pull up the presentation.
Hi, Marvin. There's a ladies meeting going on Zoom.
I believe Camelia joined. Camelia, are you there?
Oh, okay. So you'll get on.
All right,
Yes, I'm renaming right now.
okay. Thank you, Camelia. Okay, we should have a quorum now,
All right,
and I'm gonna be sharing my screen for the NYPD
Wait a minute. Marvin,
momentarily.
warning. Kira sent out or Kim sent out. Reminder.
Okay. I'm gonna mute Laura. All right,
all right. Before we get to special victims for a moment, let me just be sure. We have a quorum?
yes.
Do we have any of the elected officials here? Any of the
Actually, I'm actually here representing Assemblyman Dinowitz's office, filling in for Sam Leka. My name's Ivan Nevs.
Okay. All right, very good. All right, the NYPD has a matter on that is something we need to deal with, and they have asked if we can give them first up so they can go out and fight crime, which is always a laudable ambition.
Before we
and
begin, Julie is here now, everyone. So we're definitely good.
Who's here? I'm sorry.
Julie,
Oh, good. I thought you wasn't going to be here.
I guess it changed. She's here.
Thankfully for Zoom, I can.
Okay. All right, you are on, Detective.
So Detective Lieutenant Andriano, do you want me to start
Yeah,
us off here?
that'd be great, Jeff, if you could. And like we discussed earlier, Sergeant Felix is on representing Special Victims Division.
Okay, great. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm a civilian. My name is Jeff Rubin. I'm an urban planner from the firm Philip Habib and Associates. We are consultants to NYPD when NYPD needs consulting services related to the proposed siting of new NYPD facilities. And we have a brief presentation. We'll try to keep it expedient this evening, but also full of good information. And I just want to also add, we hope everyone is safe and sound in the aftermath of the rain and flooding last night. I'm going to actually pass the baton to my colleague, Alec Miletich, who's going to go through a few slides to give us context about the site and the general location of the proposed relocation for the Bronx Special Victims Squad.
Hi.
I thought that was on one of the channels, the Special Victims Unit.
Well, I can't really address that. We're talking about the Special Victims Squad.
I see.
I think the program may have a slightly different name, but
I see. Okay, you're on.
Alec, take it away, please.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Can you all hear me? Thumbs up?
Yes, I can hear you.
Excellent. Hi, good evening. My name is Alec Militic. As my colleague Jeff mentioned, I am with Philip Habib and Associates. So we're going to present the proposed relocation of the Bronx Special Victims facility. So as you can see on this slide right here, the location of the proposed facility is within the community board, is sort of in the south eastern portion of the district boundaries. So it is located across the street adjacent to the Marble Hill section of Manhattan, located in the Kingsbridge neighborhood of the Bronx. Next slide, please. And as sort of a much closer, more zoomed in image, you can see here that the building itself is located or is bounded rather by West 230th Street to the north, Exterior Street to the southwest. And then as you can see within a 400-foot radius of the building, there is the Major Deegan Expressway to the east and Broadway to sort of the northwest and west. As you can see in this aerial view on the right, to the southwest are the Marble Hill houses, which are a NYCHA housing complex with hundreds of units. To the north is Broadway Plaza, which is a large shopping center, and immediately right or east of the building is a CubeSmart self-storage facility. Whoops.
Wasn't that the
There we go.
milk factory or whatever it was?
I wouldn't know. I'm not sure.
Okay.
That was to the south.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
I'm on Zoom.
As you can see in this image right here, the entire building itself is located within one tax lot within the Bronx block. Hold on 1 second, 3264. However, NYPD is proposing to take only one office unit within this building. Next slide, please. So this map shows some of the land uses and other uses within the area. As I mentioned earlier, there is the Broadway Plaza Shopping Center to the north, which is a large commercial retailer. The Marble Hill houses to the southwest. Immediately to the west on Broadway, you have the 1 train, which has a stop on West 231st Street, so 1 block north. There's also the Spuyten Duyvil Metro North Station a little bit further to the south. And there are a couple of public facilities in the neighborhood, including a firehouse on the right side of the Major Deegan. There's a post office along Broadway and a bunch of other commercial retailers along Broadway as well. Next slide, please. So here are a couple of photos taken of the area last month, 2 months ago. As you can see in the top left, this is West 230th Street looking west. The building is on the left of this picture, so past the CubeSmart, and Broadway Plaza is on the right. You can see that it kind of goes below grade a little bit. There's a little bit of a decline, which is clearly evident in the picture on the top right. The picture on the bottom left is not part of the building. It is actually an adjacent building, but you can see where Broadway, West 230th Street and Exterior Street meet. And this photo on the bottom right shows the rear of the building from Exterior Street, including an accessory parking lot. Next photo, next slide, please. So here are a few more photos of the area.
Before you do that,
Sure.
can you go back to that parking lot so we can see how many cars does it hold?
The accessory parking lot holds approximately, has a capacity for about 20 spaces. And if you've reviewed the application, you may know that that would be part of the space occupied by NYPD for this facility, for this proposed facility. That's the parking lot we're talking about, right?
Which parking, I'm sorry, Chuck, just to clarify, which parking area? Are you talking about the parking inside of the building?
No, outside. There was a slide, I just wanted to know if you move back up, in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a spot where there are a couple of cars, 2 or 3 or so thereabouts, on the outside.
Yeah, that is correct. I believe that is actually the parking for the CubeSmart self-storage facility.
Oh, my
Oh,
bad.
not yours.
My apologies.
Yeah, but there is a accessory at grade parking lot that will have the capacity to hold 20 spaces.
We don't have a slide for that, do we?
We do. It's a little bit further along.
Okay.
It's closer towards the end. Yeah. So this photo on the top right shows the view looking south from Exterior Street. You can see it's fairly flat with the CubeSmart facility on the left and the Marble Hill houses covered by trees on the right. The bottom left shows the Exterior Street frontage of the building. Same thing on the bottom right. Next slide, please. So this is just a few things that I mentioned before about the frontage on West 230th and Exterior Street. The building is also 3 levels. It has a cellar level, the first floor, which is where the NYPD Special Victims services will be located, and a second floor. The building also has a school construction authority office of the Inspector General and a public parking garage, which will not be affiliated with the NYPD Special Victims Squad. And so this next slide, you can see sort of the floor plan for the existing building. So the NYPD facility will be located, or will be accessible rather, on West 230th Street, as you can see is indicated in the middle of the 3 floor plans. And what isn't shown here, but what you will see later in an image and another slide, is the accessory parking lot, which is accessible from Exterior Street. And then on this next slide, you can see the site elevations. As I pointed out in some of the photos earlier, West 230th Street is at a higher elevation than Exterior Street. It's about 13 feet higher than Exterior Street. So it appears that it is ground level along West 230th Street, but it appears that it is below ground level, or rather at a lower level on Exterior Street. As such, the accessory parking lot on Exterior Street, when you access the space through the parking lot, you need to climb up a set of stairs. But aside from that, it is on the first floor, what is considered the first floor. Next slide.
Yes. So thank you, Alec. So I'm going to, before I turn it over to NYPD, I'm going to talk a little bit about the ULURP process and the environmental review for this action. We've just sort of set the context here of the site, but NYPD is going to talk a lot more about this proposed facility in a few moments. I just wanted to explain that the approvals that are being sought here by NYPD in association with the Department of Citywide Administrative Services is a ULURP approval for a site selection, and the ULURP application included a fair share analysis. And also, because this is a privately owned building in which NYPD would be leasing a portion of the building, this also requires acquisition approval, which is kind of tied together with the site selection. The two things are, they're not separable, really. The city is being asked to approve these two things: the site selection for the Special Victims Squad and the acquisition through a lease of of space in this building. And we also have, as required, prepared an EAS, and that's where we mentioned environmental review. Next slide, please. Yeah, if you can just move the, oh, I'm sorry, you're good. So on August 27th, which is basically last Friday, the environmental assessment statement and the negative declaration, which is basically just a declaration that the project will not have any significant adverse impacts. The proposed special victims squad at this location were issued. And pardon me, I just have a pop up on my computer. So those were issued last Friday.
Hello?
Do we lose him?
I think we may have.
I can pick up in his place until he returns. There's only just 2 more slides that he was covering. So as he mentioned, the EAS and the negative declaration were issued on the 27th, which was last Friday, a week ago tomorrow. And it went before city planning on Monday, where it was certified, and thus begins the process, and which brings us to tonight, to the land use committee meeting, where we are presenting the relocation of the NYPD facility to the site in question. So
Where is
next
it
slide.
now? Where is it now?
They're located at 1086 Simpson Street.
Okay.
So I believe that NYPD will talk about the operations of the special victim services. So if NYPD would like to take over.
Hi, I'm Sergeant Dina Felix, Bronx Special Victims. So yes, the space would be way better for us, considering now that where we are located at 1086 Simpson, there's other squads in here, and you know, we want to be victim centered, and a lot of the victims have to go into the same entrance where other you know, subjects are brought in for other units, as well as there's only one entrance. So, you know, if we have one subject leaving, we might have a victim coming at the same time, which is not very helpful it's not very good for the victim. Also, it's very hard for the parking as well. Like if we have a victim coming to have an interview or whatever, there's no parking for them. And so a lot of times that's another issue that we have. This facility would actually give us help with the parking spaces. Also, there's 2 entrances, so we can actually have the victims go through one entrance and have the subjects go through another entrance. We'd also have the space for the parking for the our vehicles, the as we call the police vehicles, so that we don't have to like park them blocks away, pick up victims to take them home and whatnot. It would also create a bigger space for us for interviews, and you know, because right now we have one interview room, and sometimes we have a lot of victims, so we end up having to have a victim wait in order to have an interview. So that's any questions? I mean, that's mostly.
How many cars do you contemplate needing or that are appropriated to the unit?
As far as personal cars, or that you're talking about the police fleet? Because
The police vehicles.
we have approximately 5 cars.
How many people in the squad?
We have 23 detectives, 3 sergeants, and 1 lieutenant.
And only 5 cars?
Yes.
How is that?
So.
How are you able to move around?
So we have 2 detectives will go out, and also they're not all working at one time. We have 2 tours. So we have detectives working where usually the building will be occupied from 7 a.m. to 1 a.m. the next day. And it's split between the 2 tours. So we do what we can with the cars that we have.
All right, and then I assume you will have not less than 10 private cars, correct?
Yes,
So that's 15. Any other, and then you may have cars for either the victims or the subjects, right?
the subjects, probably not, but if we do, we would make arrangements, but the victims, sometimes, yes, sometimes we will go and pick up our victims so that they don't have to take public transportation. Sometimes they prefer to take transportation. So it all varies based on, it's all a case by case.
How many spots will you have altogether, parking spots?
What's allocated now on it, it says 20 on the slide. It's on slide number 18.
I heard that before. So you'd have 20. You're really pushing it in terms of having enough space.
Not everybody drives in, so we do have some that take public transportation, like I said.
But you've indicated you have 5 cars for the officers, 5 city cars. You have 10 probably or thereabouts for the officers' private cars. And that'll leave you 5 room for 5 more. I'm trying to figure out, where would you park if you had an overflow?
Well, the way you're thinking about it, that we have 2 tours, so it would usually be that amount at one tour, and then the next tour, when that first tour leaves, the other tour would be coming in, and then they would take up the.
Assume for the sake of argument
Mhm.
that you have all 20 spots taken, which is a fair assumption, all right, in my view.
Yes.
Where would the overflow be for you to park? Because I can foresee the possibility of whatever that area is, no parking signs going up and reserved parking signs going up in its place. And you are pretty near NYCHA housing. So tell me where you would park.
I think that if anything, we would find legal parking spots and just walk.
I have
That's-
yet
they-
to see a
that's-
police officer do that, but that's all right. And I have a high regard for the police. So let me ask you again. I'd like to see if somebody, whether it be your planner or the like, tell me, where have you got a potentiality to park? I'm assuming you're going to have on-street parking. Whether you like it or not, you're going to wind up having that happen. Where will that be?
So this is Lieutenant Andriano from Facilities Management. We don't have any plans for on-street parking, nor have we applied for any permits from the Department of Transportation. As the sergeant said, and I know it seems rare, but any overflow parking or any detective, police officer, sergeant, or any rank that cannot park on site will have to find legal parking spots. It's actually one of the edicts of the commanding officer for the Special Victims Division. We want to be good neighbors, so we have to park legally.
Let me, just from the standpoint of experience, tell you that the likelihood of that happening, the police officers have a job to do. They have a short day to do it in, and they are frequently in a hurry. And that's all to the good in a way. But they park as they can park, wherever it is. And they have a placard they'll put up in the window, and that's the end of the traffic concern. I would like you, if you will, to spend some time taking a look around in the area and identifying where the overflow would make sense, and get back to us and talk to our Traffic and Transportation Committee about it. Because it's going to happen. And I'd rather plan for it than have it happen with the people screaming.
Of course, we'd be happy to look into it.
Can we note that as a commitment that we'll get back, somebody will get back to us, say, by November?
From our end, from the NYPD's, absolutely.
Yes.
We can certainly work on that and try to get back to you by then, yes.
Understand, you may never use it, but find the place so that you have it staked out and the public knows this is an area where it's going to, in all likelihood, occasionally at least lose the spaces. But I'd like to do it on a basis where the chair of the T&E Traffic and Transportation Committee can work with you to make sure it's something that is as minimally disruptive as possible. All right,
Yes.
done? Kira, let's make sure that's in the minutes, please.
Sure.
That they have committed to get back to us in November as to where, if there is overflow, it would be, and to have a discussion with the Traffic and Transportation Committee as to where that would make the most sense. We want to cooperate with them.
Certainly, and I
We
will,
at the same time want to target it. All right,
sure. And NYPD, you have a few more slides here. Do you want to continue to go through it? And Chuck, I see people have questions, so I just want to
Correct.
make note of that.
Any questions while I'm getting to anything since,
We have hands of David, Rosemary, and Jan.
Rosemary,
It's, go ahead. I'm sorry, David has his hand up first. Do you want to go to him
Come on,
first?
Rosemary.
or-
go
Okay.
ahead.
Okay, am I on? I'm sorry. Yes? No?
Yes, Rose.
Okay. So maybe it's not fair at this point to be asking you these questions, but so on the parking thing, let me be clear. The 20 spaces are exclusively for you. It isn't a lot that accommodates 20 spaces that is open to you. It is the entire lot that is for you. Nobody else can park there. Is that a correct statement?
That's a correct statement.
Okay, good. And now this is, the land use people talked about, this is a site selection plus a lease. And that makes this a ULURP, which is interesting. Okay, so it's a site selection and a lease. What makes it a site selection? It's a use for a city agency, right? That's what it is. Okay, I don't want to, we have a similar situation with our office space, but yet we are in a different category that we're not ULURP. And I find that peculiar. Maybe that is a question better saved for Jutan or somebody later, but I find that peculiar.
I can't answer that question as needed.
Okay, should I continue or should I stop for you?
Sure, go
Jutan?
ahead, but let's leave that question aside. It's not.
That's
too
right.
long.
We'll leave it good. Okay. I do see that there is, because it's a ULURP, there was an environmental assessment statement needed. And it's my understanding that when an EAS starts, the community board gets notified of the start of the EAS. Am I correct in saying that, Jutan? Yes? We get notification of the start of an EAS. Is that correct?
No, you do not get the notification of an
We do.
EAS. You only get
We
it on
get-
an EIS.
Only on an EIS, not an
Correct.
EAS. Okay, so there would have been no ability to have prior notice of this through an environmental review. Okay,
Correct.
that's important. Thank you. And then my last question is to whoever's able to answer it. How much are you paying per square foot? How much is the
that-
city paying per square foot for the space?
The lease is in the process of being finalized.
So therefore, it's not known.
Correct.
No, it is known. They haven't finalized it. What's the
Okay,
ballpark
fine.
number?
Thank you. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hold it, hold it. You have a negotiation going on. What did the landlord request? How much did the landlord request? Transparency, please. Is there
And-
anybody?
And I will be honest, in me, when I asked the question,
Sorry,
when I asked the question is because a number of years ago, we were denied a space because OMB said that's too much. The next thing we knew, this exact space was before us, Chuck. I don't know if you remember, for another agency. And I asked the question, how much are you paying? No answer. Okay, and so I asked it again. I just, as a matter of transparency, we have been struggling to get space, and the dollar amount was important. I'm just interested in knowing how much the city is paying here. And I
So-
have no objection to whatever they're paying. I just want to know. That's all.
The number is in the mid-30s. Right now, it's the lease is not a public document, and so we don't want it to affect our negotiations.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Dan?
I think
Wait a
David,
minute, David,
lest we get
David,
into trouble.
David,
Yes.
David.
Yes, thank you,
Hold it,
Chuck. Yeah, Rosemary, I would also add, it seems that this lease process is going far faster than ours is. But that's a different topic. All right, so I actually want to follow on to Chuck's questions relating to the egress. That property at the corner of Broadway and 230, there's an endoscopy center right there on the corner, but it sounds like you might have two entrances, one on exterior and one on 230. Now, my concern is the real walk-in entrance of that property, because the experience in New York City is the way you discover where a police precinct is to find a block or two where there are vehicles. Almost none of them are RMPs, mostly personal commuting vehicles parked perpendicularly on the sidewalk, which is true for our own precinct about 6 blocks north. And so a lot of space has been taken by these personal commuting cars, and actually they've been in recent months blocked off with stanchions the whole street in front of their precinct to prevent people from parking there or driving through there. So my real concern is if 230th Street is ever used as a entrance to the building, there will be double parking all the time. I don't care what the CO's commitment is. It will always be, a detective's in a rush, this, that, or the other thing. There will always be parking on the sidewalk and double parking on 230th Street, which is already very jammed because 50 feet away is the entrance to the Major Deegan Expressway. So I don't know exactly where the accessory parking is, but frankly, that sounds like the right place to make the entrance to the building. So it's completely away from the normal traffic of the neighborhood and of the Major Deegan. Oh, and by the way, the exterior street would be a problem because that's a narrow two-way street with parking on both sides. So if officers end up double parking there, that will be a problem. So my question to you is, where is the actual entrance to the office there?
I apologize if I wasn't clear earlier. The actual entrance to the office would be located on West 230th Street. That's where victims, their families, if you scroll down in the slide, we actually have a schematics plan. That is where the victims and their families would enter, and there wouldn't be, from my understanding, there would not be a public entrance from exterior street. The only entrance to the building would be along West 230th Street. And the entrance that you might have seen on exterior street, I believe, is only for the parking garage and for the adjacent building, from my understanding.
So the officers, when they're coming in from their commute, or they're coming in from a patrol or an interview, or out in the community, they will be entering the building at 230th Street. And you're suggesting to us that they're never going to double park or park on the sidewalk there.
They would be entering from the accessory parking lot. NYPD could correct me or add to this. They would be entering from the accessory parking lot on exterior street. And there the entrance to the building is located in the back of the parking lot. We have a photo slide.
All right,
that
that's the
indicates where it
opposite of
is
what
too.
you just said.
So the main entrance to the facility is on West 230th Street. Officers that are working during the day will utilize the rear entrance through the rear parking lot to gain access to the building. Officers that use public transportation, victims, advocate groups, district attorneys, general visitors will use that 230th Street entrance.
Wait a minute, now, you have me confused. A minute ago, I heard your planner say that the entrance is on West 230th Street.
That's correct.
So that
Main entrance into the facility is on West.
where in terms of West 230th Street, you have a diagram up. Show us with the marker where the car would be. There's 230th, right?
On slide 15, it shows the parking lot and then it shows the building. So I'm assuming it's like trying to make it bigger. This is Sergeant Felix speaking.
My slide 15 just shows these words.
You can go to the photo slide. The photo slide towards the end might give a good indication of
Okay.
where the
I think-
access would be.
That one right there. It's that will go up.
Correct. Yeah,
Yes.
this, yeah.
Go up. Yeah. So if you zoom in on that one, you see the purple, that's the parking lot. And then there's as called a perpetrator entry. Go up a little bit, please.
Oh, hold on, I'm sorry.
Are you,
Zoom
are
in
you
on the
pointing to the
second.
left or to the right?
I'm pointing to, well, if you go up to the slide right above,
Right now I'm looking at, well,
so you see that slide, if you move it up a little bit. Yeah, that slide, if you zoom in on it and go up a little bit, that's the parking lot. And then the pink portion, there's an entry right there. It says the perpetrator entry. So that's where we would go in through if we're parking. Whereas the other entrance would be for if the victim comes on their own, if we're like escorting a victim, we would.
The police officer arrives. The police officer arrives. And I assume he's going to enter. Well, forget about the perpetrator, forget about the victim. The police officer is going to enter on 230th Street, is he not? Or she not?
If they're coming by car, they'll be entering through the accessory parking lot and through the pink entrance. That's,
Where is the accessory parking lot? Show it to me, if you will.
it's the light blue,
On the right,
Right.
that says existing parking lot.
correct.
Okay, and that's. She thought that was next to the Deegan.
No,
where is the entrance to the existing parking lot that's highlighted in blue?
so if you
Exterior
scroll down
street.
to the, if you scroll down to the next slide. So the bottom two pictures. So that fence right there will be redone, but that's going to be the secure dedicated parking, the secure dedicated parking. And in the back of that parking lot is where that entrance is.
Where the red and blue are?
Correct. So like where there's like a car, you see there's a kind of a car next to the blue wall. That's where the entrance that police officers, whether they have victims or suspects or whatever, when they drive in, that's where they will bring them in. And if they're driving in their personal vehicles, that's where they will go in as well.
But, and I apologize, Chuck, is the parking the outdoor parking or is there some other entrance in there?
No, it's solely outdoor parking that's dedicated to NYPD. And the entrance is just along the brick wall at the back.
Understood now. Thank you.
Now, I have a question.
And this is also, just one thing to keep in mind, as was described earlier by the sergeant as well as Lieutenant Andriano, is that this is not a traditional police precinct with high traffic of both officers and the public coming in and out. It's much more of, specific to a case and, just not high traffic. People aren't coming in because they want to, make a report other than what the special victims specialize in.
So let me ask you a question, Mr. Heffler. You are going to ultimately have some form of contract as between the city of New York or the agency and the owner of the building, correct?
Correct.
And that contract can include appropriate clauses, correct?
Correct.
Can it include a clause that bars any parking on 230th Street?
Well, you know, the city, when they're entering into a lease as tenant, doesn't want to, you know.
I don't care what it wants. Understand, Mr. Heffler, I'm about to vote against you. Now, can it include that clause?
I assume it can. I'm not part of the Office of General Counsel.
Well, then maybe we ought to hold this over to the next meeting. Let me make this very clear to you. I think the police department of the city of New York is one of the finest institutions of government in the city. I have nothing but respect for it. I have supported it consistently in every agency in which I have been involved. This is not a police department issue. This is needs. And you got to figure out that 230th Street is a very busy area. The community has an interest in it. You have a way of avoiding it. And you should. Avoiding the problem, I mean. Now, I may be alone. I speak only for myself. My colleagues may have a different view. But I have to tell you, I'm troubled by the possibility that we have a rerun of the 5-0.
Understood, but
Go ahead.
I was going to say, you know, in negotiating a lease, you know, that would be equivalent to saying, you know, we want the landlord to not give us air conditioning on certain hours. Like, we want to have the ability.
I do it all the time. I do it all the time to save money.
Okay. The landlord also does not control the street. Like, the landlord does not own the street. So the landlord cannot enforce or restrict, you know,
I understand that. My second question was to make the community board a third-party beneficiary to enforce it, but I don't need to go there. All I'm trying to do is to make sure that there's some protection to ensure that 230 doesn't go the way of the 5-0, which is a superb institution that does absolutely superb work. But there's a problem, and I'd like to head it off.
How do
Understood. That should, I don't think the lease is not the appropriate vehicle to do that. You know,
Tell me
if there's-
where it is.
Well,
Where is it?
Scott, if you don't mind, again, as Scott said, this is Lieutenant Andriano from NYPD. I don't think the lease is the appropriate document for it. So how do we, as the NYPD, give you our commitment? Do we put that in a letter to you? How do we memorialize it and gain your trust that we won't park on 230th Street? It's the reason why we sought a facility with parking so that we could be a good neighbor. We don't want the cars on the street. We want them kept in the lot. So how, is there a way, a letter, something we can send as part of this application to assuage any concern that you may have? The facility is greatly needed. The detectives and the investigators.
If there's something you can do, that reflects a written commitment, that's a step forward.
I think we'd be happy to do it. Again, it's a specialized unit with hand-picked investigators that want to be there to do a very difficult, excruciating job. So I don't think they would do anything.
Every police officer has an excruciatingly difficult job, without exception. They're the most underpaid and overworked people in the city of New York.
Well, I'm going to agree with you on that, sir. So would a letter from the commanding officer of the division suffice? If yes, we can get that off to you. Who should it go to? What would you like to see in there? We'd be happy to draft that. Our commitment is to you, it's to the community, it's to the victims of sexual assault. We want this facility for us and for the community, so we'll do what's needed.
All right, let me see if my colleagues agree. Let me see if my colleagues agree with the concern I've expressed. Is there anyone who has a differing view on the board, on the land use committee?
Nope.
Yes,
Are you on the committee, Camelia?
I'm sorry to say, Charles, but I am.
Good.
Can I just
All
say
right.
something? Can I have, I had my hand up. Can I just take a moment here to add something else?
I think Dan was next.
Sure.
Chuck?
Go ahead.
Well, I don't care who you call on. Doesn't matter to me which order you do, Chuck. Whoever you want to call on first. Yeah,
Let Camelia go first.
you got it.
Thank
Go
you,
ahead.
thank you, Dan. Just wanted to say thank you very much to the police and NYPD as an agency for considering this particular area as a site for placing a special victims unit. It was touched upon by the previous speaker, but I have a feeling that members of the community board in this instance kind of tend to put things together. Like people tend to imagine like a regular police precinct with the kind of the tension, all the cars outside, people coming upset that they bumped their car into something, all these things. But this type of special victims squads, they are set up in a much different way. They are supposed to be non-conspicuous. There is a lot of discretion around them. This is not a place that is kind of hitting the public. We are right here. These are squads that are dealing with extremely, extremely sensitive situations involving sexual assault, children that are being sexual abused or beaten. So there are situations where NYPD has an interest on maintaining sort of discretion around the site, a certain, again, non-conspicuousness of their operations. So I don't know why we are sort of being so quick in jumping to the assumption that they will double park on 230 or whatever, when the very mission of this highly specialized unit is to be discreet and to provide a very non-aggressive sort of environment. And just wanted to add that. And again, I had the opportunity to interact with a special victim unit squad, and nothing but other than the highest respect from the way they interacted with people in very, very vulnerable situations. Also, just wanted to add to the that was made before as far as potential need for additional parking. I mean, right across the street from where the entrance to these offices will be, there is a large commercial parking facility for the Broadway Plaza, which during the week has fairly good number of empty spots. I mean, if that becomes a case, NYPD would definitely have the option of entering a conversation with the commercial operator and like securing 2, 3, 4 more parking spots if that's the need on a temporary basis or special situation. One thing I wanted to add as a word of caution though for the NYPD, no problem, yes, is that victims or families visiting will inevitably park, if your parking lot is full, will inevitably park in the Broadway Plaza parking, which has a history of towing people if they do not actually patronize one of the stores. So be mindful and know in advance to warn people not to park there unless, if there are other options, of course, but just to not to be in a situation where you have a mom coming with a child in a vulnerable situation and then parking there and then being towed. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for the recommendation.
And
Hey, just a few questions, just to kind of clarify a few points. First, the gate in the back, is that going to be changed at all? Is there going to be a different type of entrance or a different facade to that gate? How will it be secured for your vehicles in the back, or will it just be open?
It'll be open throughout the day. And then I believe we close, Dina, at 1 a.m. so that the lot will be secured. But I would imagine we'll be changing the gate. It's in pretty poor condition, as well as the fence.
Understood. Thank you. So the next question I have is this. I'm sorry, just actually kind of more of a clarification. That 230th intersection is probably one of the worst in the area, probably one of the worst in the Bronx with the amount of vehicles going through it. It historically has a lot of accidents. That's why, at least for me, and I think you're hearing it from other members, there's a great concern about where the vehicles are going and how the traffic is flowing. Chuck had mentioned a letter beforehand. I think if there were a letter, and again, my concern would be, and again, just so you know, and I'm sure you guys do, and Philip Habib, I know you guys are traffic experts as well. DCAS presently has 8 to 6 p.m. parking there. So I'm sure you guys are aware of that. I'm not sure how the vehicle mix might change with your placards. My concern would be vertical parking or 90-degree parking, which happens closer to the 50th, where we have a few blocks like that. So I guess if there were a letter, Chuck, you would ask what else could be in it, or I believe the NYPD did. I said from a CO, what I would want to know is that no RMPs are going to be parked vertical there, and that the CO would personally commit to writing any personal vehicles if they do violate any parking. I think if I saw that in a commitment from NYPD, I would, for myself, be a little bit more assured. But again, the traffic safety here is my concern, given the intersection. And I can tell you, and everyone on this board can tell you, it's a very dangerous intersection. There's a lot of activity going on over there.
Mr. Paternak was the chairman for some years, an excellent one, of Traffic and Transportation Committee. I see one other hand, Marty.
Okay.
Yes, just for historical purposes, Chuck, I agree with you and my concern about police vehicles taking liberties. And I'm reminded that for over a decade, Community Board 8 had as its #1 capital budget request was purchase of a number of buildings on Broadway for the purpose of establishing a parking lot for the 50th precinct. And the precinct was with us hand in glove, for over a decade, until they changed their minds. And it no longer became a priority. And so Broadway is now filled with vehicles that are parked all over the place, crashed vehicles left over all over the place. And so my concern is a letter from the captain, and captains seem to change, and there's no historic memory. So the letter needs to come from greater than the precinct itself.
Anyone else want to be heard on this?
Yes, Chuck, if you don't mind, just a sentence, if you don't mind. Okay, it's everybody must understand, nobody is objecting to the use of this property for this purpose. It is a noble purpose, it's great, it has to be done. And you guys have planned it with discretion and with back entrances and front entrances. That's great. But we do have, as a community board, an issue on the parking, and all these statements are serious, and you're taking them seriously. My only suggestion is the following. This is a ULURP issue, which, by the way, I just learned that you could have an office lease that's a ULURP issue. Can we not have as a requirement in the ULURP approval whatever we want to do with the parking? And again, I don't know if that brings it to more an ability to police it, excuse the expression, police it more if it's a requirement of the ULURP approval. Remember, this is a ULURP approval. So maybe the letter from the precinct is a fine, but this is a ULURP approval. Would that, maybe Jutan can tell us, does that bring a little more comfort or jurisdiction to this particular issue? That's my statement, Chuck.
Anyone else? Lieutenant.
Yes, sir.
We have a meeting of the board next week. If your folks can get council's office and whoever else in place, I would be happy, but I think even better if you would have a conversation with either Deb Travis, the chairman of the Traffic and Transportation Committee, or Dan Paternak, the past chairman for many years, about how to deal with the appropriate language. Dan has just given you an idea of the kind of things that might be helpful. And I'd like to see if we could do that. If we can have that in place by the meeting, is it Tuesday or Wednesday? I keep forgetting.
Tuesday.
Pardon me?
Tuesday.
Tuesday a week.
Yeah, following Tuesday. Chuck, Juton has his hand up. I think he may have.
Juton, go ahead.
Hi, yeah. Hi, everyone. So I just wanted to clarify a little bit on Rosemary's question regarding why this isn't necessarily an office space. And why this is a full ULURP for the site selection acquisition action. The reason is because for an office space application, similar to what Community Board 8 is seeking for their new office facilities, is that basically the entire square footage of the space has to be office space. Where in this case, there are several, I don't know the exact dimensions, but there's a certain amount of space that has holding cells and some other things which technically are not office space. Therefore, it fell out of the office space bucket. And then the next category is really a site selection and acquisition. In the same way that any basically office space that doesn't meet that criteria would be a site selection and acquisition application.
Okay, so.
Do you know if it's
Lieutenant
possible, I'm sorry, do you know if it's possible to memorialize that we won't park police cars on 230th Street in the ULURP application? Can we do that as a condition of the ULURP?
The community board can ask that in their recommendation. And then that will go through the public review process. And just like any public review process, it would go through and changes could be made to the application, which could reflect comments through the recommendation of the community board.
So those comments and recommendations would be noted as a condition for the ULURP, correct?
I mean, like I said, the community board can have a conditional recommendation and have that as a condition of their approval.
Seems like a great idea.
Chuck, are you on? We may have lost Chuck.
Can I ask a question? It's Susan. I'm
Marty,
not
you
on the
wanna-
board.
Marty, you want to take it?
Under duress, yes. Susan, what's your question?
Hi, so I'm familiar with the medical offices there, and it's one elevator. Is it the same exact entrance that you use, or is it going to be a separate lobby entrance? And is there going to be, if needed, an elevator? So that the two they'll never meet?
Well, by the way, let me reintroduce myself. This is Jeff Rubin from Philip Habib and Associates, and I apologize, I got cut off earlier. But to answer your question, since the public entrance to this proposed facility is on West 230th Street, and the proposed facility is on what is on that side of the building, the ground floor, there is no need for an elevator. And I think I believe what you're talking about is further down the street in a different part of the building and or possibly the neighboring building. So I mean, we can confirm this with a follow-up, but I believe that I believe these are different lobbies, but it's certainly no elevator to access this facility for the public from West 230th Street.
Okay, so it would be two separate entrances.
Yeah, I mean, this building and the building immediately to the west have more than one lobby. There's a couple different lobbies. What we can do is we can sort of double check that and follow up with the district manager to confirm that, but that's my understanding.
Nick, thank you.
You're welcome.
Laura?
I might have missed this. Did you say you had a deadline or a date when your approval from the community board or, whatever is, do we have a date?
Well, others can address this too, but under the ULURP calendar, there's 60 days. And since this application was just certified a few days, in fact, this past Monday, I think the 60 days, I don't know if the community board has received the formal referral yet, but that's when the 60-day clock starts ticking, which would probably be either later sometime around now or early next week. So, I mean, NYPD may would probably appreciate if it could be less than 60 days, but I think under the city charter, you have 60 days to review.
So I'm sorry I got off. My computer has been going around the clock, literally. We will, if you have no problem with it, put this on at the head of the calendar at the October meeting. Does that work for you?
I think so. I mean, I think if NYPD wants to chime in, they certainly can, but I think yeah, they would appreciate, with all deliberate speed, how the processing of the application. And are we talking early October or late October? I'm just
Yeah,
curious.
the October meeting would be scheduled as of now for October 4th.
October 4th. I mean, I think that would be, considering that you have 60 days, I think that would be very generous.
The timing works from our end as well, Scott.
If you can do that,
Yeah.
I think what I'd like to ask you to do is if you would have a discussion on this issue with the people from our traffic committee so that we can work out something together. Let me ask DCAS a question. Is it DCAS still on?
Yes, I'm here.
There's a parking lot across the street, am I right? Or in the immediate vicinity?
Yes, there's one in the immediate vicinity.
Why can you not lease a number of spots, additional spots for the police department here?
It's just for the most part, a question of budget.
But Scott, if I may add, I mean, we sincerely believe that the 20 spaces that
Correct.
would be provided here are sufficient. And we're happy to, elaborate on that point with you. But I think part of the, just as the one who analyzed this, I mean, again, this is a facility with a relatively small number of staffers. NYPD can remind you of the exact numbers, but, between fleet cars and personal cars, we believe that 20 spaces, 99% of the time will be sufficient.
I'll give you a written guarantee that that's not going to work out within a year. But that life being what it is. So let me make this suggestion. You'll have a meeting. Dan, you and Deb get together with whoever they give as their designees. If you will be in touch with our district service manager, Kira Gannon, and work out an arrangement for a date, understand, I don't think you will find many people in this community who are more supportive of the police department and of its needs than the members of this board and of this committee.
Understood. And we understand you have legitimate concerns, and I think we want to be responsive.
Okay.
So I could be in touch with all of you tomorrow or later this week, or tomorrow is later this week. So tomorrow. Thank you.
All right. Very good. So can I have a motion to, I guess I don't even need a motion. We'll adjourn this to the October meeting, the head of the calendar for the October meeting of land use, all right?
Very good.
All right. Anyone dissent from that? Good, that's done. The next issue I have for the calendar is the question of the proposed text amendment. Jutan, are you ready to make your presentation?
Yes, and actually Fernando Ortiz from our office is going to begin, and I'll be helping out with Q&A, as well as Department of Transportation is here. We have Navarro Lopez who's going to actually start the presentation.
Navarro,
Hello.
I'm going to make you co-host so that you can share.
Hello,
Or Fernando.
it's Fernando Ortiz. If you could actually make me co-host, since I will put up the
Yes,
presentation.
I actually made you co-host first, so you should be co-host now.
Okay, perfect. Good evening, everyone. My name is Fernando Ortiz. I am the Community Engagement Associate Planner at the Bronx office. And I'm joined today by Navarro Lopez from DOT and my colleague Jutan, and we will be presenting on the Permanent Open Restaurants Program. So I will go ahead and start to share my screen. Just bear with me for one moment. Perfect. Is everyone able to see my screen?
Yep.
So I will pass the baton over to Navardo, who's with us from DOT.
All right, great. Can everyone hear me? Good evening, everybody. As Fernando said, my name is Navardo Lopez. I'm the Bronx Borough Commissioner for New York City DOT. For the next 10 minutes, I'll be taking us through where things stand from a more programmatic standpoint with the permanent open restaurants, which will continue to give restaurants the option of sidewalk and roadway seating for outdoor dining. The program will look to better balance the many needs of the streets and sidewalks, keeping both restaurants and other users in mind. And we're going to take what has worked and has not worked in the past, both in the pre-COVID and now during the emergency program when developing the future guidelines. I want to make clear that while this presentation is going to cover both sidewalk and roadway dining, DOT and city planning are asking the board tonight for your opinion on the specific sidewalk cafe at text amendment. Next slide. Okay, I think we, hold on 1 second, sorry. As you know, the city had street and sidewalk cafes before COVID, but far fewer of them. The majority of the cafes were administered by the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection. DOT did run one small pilot of public roadway seating, which we called street seats. There were only 25 setups, mostly in Manhattan, though there was one in the Bronx. Our understanding is that the relatively low participation in the DCWP program was in large part due to the cost of the program and the complicated process for restaurants to apply for a cafe, a sidewalk cafe. Next slide.
Am I correct, by the way, that there isn't a single sidewalk cafe in the Bronx? Is that right? I'm talking about sidewalk on the sidewalk.
We'll get there, Chuck. We'll get there.
Okay.
Okay. During COVID, New York City suspended existing rules through an emergency executive order by Mayor de Blasio. Afterwards, DOT was directed to create the Open Restaurants program, which allows restaurants to conduct their business in the public right of way. Since the launch of the program about over a year ago, over 11,000 restaurants have participated, which has saved an estimated 100,000 jobs in the restaurant industry. But by many accounts, the program has been a lifesaver, not just to the restaurant industry, but also to the city, which has seen an incredible, which has seen the sort of impact that outdoor dining can do to our streets and sidewalks, and sort of bring those streets and sidewalks to life. Next slide. Over the past year, we've learned lessons that highlight the opportunities and challenges that will be critical to informing how we proceed with creating a permanent program. We think the robust use of the emergency program was helped by three things. First, unlike the pre-emergency sidewalk cafe program, no location was off limits. Any restaurant with ground floor frontage and sidewalk or roadway space that met the criteria was able to participate in the program. Second, the program was free and easy to access. Unlike the pre-COVID sidewalk cafe program, which required months of multiple review by city agencies. And third, the element of the roadway dining gave brand new options to restaurants, particularly those that might not have enough room on the sidewalk to accommodate a cafe. However, it's also worth noting a few challenges that we encountered with the emergency program. First, the speed of the rollout and the fact that the program was built from scratch under the emergency circumstances created some confusion. As DOT learned more about operating a program like this, and when the program was extended by the mayor into the winter months, we had to change the guidelines several times throughout the past year in order to keep everyone safe. Second, throughout the program, DOT learned more about the challenges specific to the roadway seating component of the program. For instance, we heard from other city agencies and state agencies, such as the fire department and also New York City Transit, that there were issues with turning radiuses and safety signs being blocked, which is important for large vehicles, fire trucks, and city buses. Safety is of the utmost importance to us and will remain so. So we need to make sure that we work with our agency partners in the future when developing a permanent program. Third, enforcement has been complicated on multiple fronts. And on one hand, you have restaurants who are dealing with a lot, especially a lot during the emergency during COVID, who felt squeezed and over-inspected by many different city agencies at the same time. But on the other hand, you had many communities, particularly the mobilely impaired, concerned about under-enforcement, community boards concerned about, improper setup, improper blockage of the sidewalk, improper blockage of the roadway, and there were concerns about how quickly the city can go and enforce any infraction. Next slide. That being said, the program has seen tremendous participation. And in April, the City Council overwhelmingly voted in favor of a bill to make it permanent. This requires changing a number of different laws that control outdoor dining in non-emergency situations. Next slide. To start, we anticipate that as the emergency program, DOT will administer a permanent option for both sidewalk seating and also roadway seating, which will have similar rules to the current sidewalk cafes, but it will be available citywide. We want to be sensitive to the traveling public, minding clear sidewalk paths, but also mindful to the surrounding community and making sure that we have rules for sound, noise level, and hours of operation. Next slide. When finalized, specific design guidelines will be very clear and will revolve around those principles to balance the use of the sidewalk space by a restaurant, but also maximize the experience of openness and activation to the general public. For most of the city, we're proposing requiring 8-foot wide clear paths or half the sidewalk width, whichever is greater. In some areas of higher foot traffic, the city is proposing that businesses need to maintain a 12-foot clear path or half the sidewalk width, whichever is greater. And in some special cases where it still may make sense despite a narrow sidewalk, we're looking at creating a waiver that will allow the clear path to be 6 feet. This waiver would be co-reviewed by the Mayor's Office of People with Disabilities. Next slide. We think the introduction of the roadway option is a tremendous new opportunity for restaurants, especially those who may have narrow sidewalks. But we also recognize that there's been a lot of challenges and a lot of complaints with the roadway seating. So the city is working on how this will be set up permanently. But we will have setups in parking lanes. We want to make sure that they maintain public safety. We want to have clear guidelines on the structures themselves, enforcement on sounds, and then we also want to make sure that all these structures are ADA compliant. In the future, we expect that any roadway setup will have to look more like the one that's in this slide. So we're no longer going to allow fully enclosed structures, which we tend to see a lot citywide. We want to make sure that all these have sturdy barriers on each side, And we also want to make sure that they're highly visible to drivers and pedestrians. Next slide. The city is proposing that the new program will not operate during the colder months. This is one of the complaints we've heard, not just from communities, but also from the Department of Sanitation. And as you can see in the photo on the slide, snow removal becomes an issue when you have these structures in the roadway. However, while we don't expect to allow, for the most part, structures during the colder winter months, we do plan on creating a hardship waiver that would allow restaurants to keep their setups in place, depending on whether or not they're able to remove it. Currently under the emergency program, however, all restaurants will be able to keep operating uninterrupted through the upcoming winter season. Next slide. In looking at both moving the legal authority to run the program to DOT and in creating a new process for the roadway setups, the city is looking to streamline the review process as much as possible while leaving in place essential roles of agency and public review. Next slide. To make this permanent program a reality, 3 steps are needed to advance it. The focus for today is the removal of locational prohibitions through zoning. It's key to unlocking the full citywide universe of applicability and consolidating control and accountability for the program under a single agency. We are currently working with the City Council, who strongly support this program, to enact appropriate legislation which will update the laws governing sidewalk cafes, and then create a new set of laws and rules to govern the future permanent program in the roadway and on the sidewalk. Next slide. Following zoning and legal changes, we anticipate rulemaking that formalizes many of the program's design and applications details, and then soon afterwards we'll create a formal opening up of the application process for the new program. We're at the beginning of a process developing the future program. So during this time, the current emergency program is expected to be in effect for at least another 1.5 years. The expectation is that restaurants will have ample time to transition into a new process if they choose to, with minimal operational disruption. Changing zoning is the first critical step to making this program permanent, but as you can see on the timeline, there are multiple steps to developing the full program. During each step, we will welcome public input and review, and we'll have a process where communities can weigh in. Next slide. So COVID-19 really shaped the way New Yorkers think about how our streets can be used, which has been the one silver lining in this pandemic. We welcome feedback and encourage all to visit our website to submit comments as we develop all the elements of the permanent program. Once again, the roadway portion of this presentation is preliminary, and our primary purpose in presenting to the board tonight is to gather feedback on city planning's proposed text amendment changes, specifically related to sidewalk cafes. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Fernando to talk about those changes to the text amendment.
Thank you, Navardo. I will now present DCP's portion of this presentation, which is on the open restaurants text amendment. As mentioned, the proposed text amendment would remove, there are 3 main legal processes to create a permanent open restaurant program. The first, which is the focus of the rest of the presentation, is the removal of the locational prohibitions by a text amendment. Any unnecessary zoning restrictions stand in the way of thousands of restaurants from participating in outdoor dining past the emergency. This zoning proposal is key to unlocking the full citywide universe of applicability and consolidating control and accountability for the program under a single agency, which would be the Department of Transportation. So the zoning proposal, this text amendment would remove the entirety of Chapter 1, Article 4 of the zoning resolution and related texts in special districts and other areas that relate to the sidewalk cafes. It will remove any language that prevents sidewalk cafes in special districts. It will remove rules around enclosures, operable windows, sidewalk widenings that would preclude, or limit outdoor dining under the open restaurants program. And it will also clear up any definition and reference of the above. So the question is, how will this affect sidewalk cafes? This will ultimately allow any restaurant anywhere in the city to potentially apply for a DOT sidewalk cafe based on its sidewalk conditions. So just some background information. As of March 2020, there were about 27,000 restaurants in New York City, which you can see on the map on the right, kind of shows right before the pandemic, so pre-COVID, the location and how dispersed restaurants were throughout New York City. Again, pre-COVID eligible sidewalk cafe locations. Under the zoning rules, which are currently suspended, zoning dictates 3 different kinds of cafes and where in the city they can be located. Most commonly enclosed cafes, which allows for readily removable tables, chairs, and fencing with no allowable overhead coverage other than the umbrellas or retractable roofs. There is the small sidewalk cafe, which is an unenclosed sidewalk cafe containing no more than a single row of tables and chairs adjacent to the street line and can extend no further than 4.5 feet from the building, or an enclosed sidewalk cafe, which is in definition as extends of the building to the sidewalk using light building materials. So again, pre-COVID, these were the kind of 3 sidewalk cafe models or locations that we saw. Zoning held the geographic restrictions of where these cafe types were allowed. The public could view where cafes were allowed on DCP zoning and land use map, which is the link on the bottom right. Yellow allows only small cafe types. Purple are areas where only enclosed and small cafes are allowed, and green is where all cafe types are allowed. It's important to notice that you can see a lot of areas where cafes weren't allowed at all, even if the sidewalks were wide and conditions otherwise would have allowed it. Red is areas specifically prohibited from having cafes, and blue is all the residential areas of the city. To date, over 11,500 restaurants are participating in the open restaurants program. In particular, the city saw a huge surge of outdoor dining occur in the outer boroughs. 10,000 of the restaurants use the sidewalk for outdoor setup. So as mentioned, we have seen a huge amount of restaurants participating in the open restaurants program in the last year and a half. During the emergency program, 2,500 restaurants were permitted in areas that would have been prohibited or limited under existing zoning, but the proposed text amendment would now allow them. Looking at the map on the right, in red are restaurants in specific areas that were prohibited by zoning. These include commercial mid-blocks, certain special districts, under elevated rail lines, and other named congested areas. In blue are all the grandfathered restaurants in residential areas. Zoning doesn't allow restaurants in residential areas, but many of these uses predate zoning and so have remained in place. We estimate that there are somewhere around 2,900 citywide, and 1,000 of these were participating in the open restaurants program. And finally, the yellow dots are cafes and zones that would have limited to the small typology only. So other cleanup actions in the text amendment include removing definitions and cross-references to cafes, removing text that precludes operable windows that service outdoor restaurants, ensuring that no enclosure provisions require a restaurant to be fully indoors as a condition of its zoning district, and clarifying sidewalk widening text to ensure it does not conflict with the operation of the open restaurants program. Having said all that, we're going to look a little bit into Community Board 8. Prior to COVID, these were the sidewalk cafes showing both their location and by type. Again, the purple dots are unenclosed and the green are enclosed. There were about 8 existing cafes in Community District 8, which are listed here, 7 of which were unenclosed and 1 which was an enclosed. So, and you can see that most of these restaurants were located around this Riverdale Avenue in this kind of cluster. And then again, just some context, since the Open Restaurants program, we have 16 sidewalk cafes, 6 roadway, and 31 being considered both. We currently have 5 in areas prohibited by zoning and 1 in a residential or no cafe zoning area. And this link in the bottom is just the tool, the Sidewalk Cafe data tool that you or anyone can use to kind of just play around with the data and see, you know, specific information around each sidewalk cafe, and you know, kind of you can take some filters on and off to play around with the data tool. And I will open it up to questions now. Thank you.
All right. I'd like to just quickly ask you one question, then a few follow-up. As I understand the map you showed a few moments ago, the color green was intended to denote those cafes that could be all, in other words, roadway as well as sidewalk. Is that correct?
Yes.
And am I correct as well that the text amendment presupposes authorizations that would extend to roadway cafes? Am I correct?
I believe so, yes.
So am I correct that you could not bifurcate this proposal in terms of saying, hypothetically, I love one and don't love the other? Is that correct?
I actually think you could bifurcate them, and you could have a discussion on, you know, like the zoning portion that we are presenting today is really specific to the sidewalk cafe. We did go into the larger open roads discussion, which includes the roadway portion, because we knew that would be a discussion point, and we know that the community is aware of this. And they are advancing together in some sense for Department of Transportation to take on this. But the part that the zoning, specifically this text amendment, is presenting is specific to the sidewalk cafes. And so, yes, it is bifurcated.
The language presupposes areas in respect of the roadways as well, does it not? The language of the text amendment embraces possibilities and issues pertaining to the roadway cafe, does it not?
It does not, no. The language in our zoning resolution that we are proposing is basically removing all of the sidewalk cafe requirements in the zoning today. And it is adding some basic clarification language for
would you then be prepared either to represent or to amend it to make clear that no provision herein contained shall apply to a roadway cafe?
No, because that doesn't, we're not proposing anything in this proposal as far as the text amendment. We're really removing rules in this text amendment as far as the zoning goes. So, you know, what you'll be basically voting on is the removal of the sidewalk cafe provisions within the zoning resolution.
You're jousting with me.
No, I'm really
I know
not.
you're jousting with me.
And I
know that this is applicable in parts to both. So let me prove my point.
I think you need to see the way that the text is written, because if you see the text and how it's actually, basically the entire text that we're proposing is strike throughs and removals. We're not really adding anything, including we're not adding anything specific to the roadways. So we can have the discussion on it, but we're not proposing anything regarding the roadways in the zoning resolution.
If I may just jump in here to
this
offer
question, Jutan. Am I correct that roadway cafes are under COVID-19 extended through 2022?
I don't know what the details are of the mayoral executive order.
I can answer that question, Mr. Chair. The current emergency program that exists today that allows for both sidewalk and roadway cafes will be in effect until we develop a permanent program.
So
So
that,
we
in
imagine
other
that
words,
it'll be in effect, we imagine it'll be in effect till at least 2023.
so that if we wait till the new administration takes hold with a new commissioner of DOT and maybe a new commissioner at city planning and everywhere else in the world, maybe they'll reappoint, you will have a new outlook. And I'm wondering why the rush in the twilight hours of an administration. There is this major push. But let me make my point in tangible terms. You are seeking not only to get a text amendment here, but you're also changing the guard. The Department of Transportation will become the administrator for the cafes rather than Consumer Affairs. Consumer Affairs has a reputation of being pro-community boards and pro-communities. With respect, I cannot say the same about DOT, especially in the absence of my friend Polly Trottenberg. And so you have a major change, a different philosophy. Community interests are the guiding post, people interests are the guiding post for Consumer Affairs. Doing whatever it does is a different standard for DOT. During my tenure on the MTA, time and again, we saw that clash. Buses couldn't go, buses couldn't operate properly because you willy-nilly put bicycle paths right in the way of the buses. New York City Transit had a disaster on its hand. Take Broadway down in Manhattan constantly. I'll tell you what, go tomorrow morning, anytime before noon tomorrow, to Johnson Avenue. It was a 4-lane road. Tomorrow it will be a 1-lane road. There will be the roadway cafe, then one row of double parking or triple parking in front of it, another row on the other side, and you have the cars going but 2 directions on a single roadway. Do it tomorrow. I've done it for the past few Fridays. No question about it. That isn't something that really terribly concerns some people, but it is an issue that concerns an awful lot of people in this community who love the restaurants, who want to do anything they can. For example, tax abatement complete. Rent abatement complete. That will give the restaurants the new life. But to screw up the traffic is a problem. Let me give you another one. Design. There are no design criteria in here. There are no 2 sidewalk roadway cafes that bear resemblance in terms of structural concerns. Some of them are so weak and badly constructed that one car taps it and the whole thing goes down, as we saw on 256th Street and Riverdale Avenue. And down they go. That's an issue. We have the issue of whether these things are durable. You said in the winter months, they will be allowed to leave the structure up. So now we're going to have the situation of snow, accumulated snow, sanitation piling up snow, the roadway cafe, and these. There is a disregard of transportation on the vehicular side. That has been the unwritten policy of this administration. And one of your senior officials has so advised me. The unwritten policy of adopting what William Buckley, when he ran for mayor in '65, declared was his policy campaign point. Have every road in the city of New York be one way out of town and thereby get rid of cars. That may be a great idea if we have adequate public transportation to replace it, but we don't. And so I'm not here to make a speech to you. but I'm here to say you have a whole bunch of problems here. This is self-certification. Self-certification. An architect or an owner of one of these sidewalk places can certify it on its own without an architect or an engineer attesting to its appropriateness in terms of architectural design or safety. That's a concern. It's a concern that bothers everybody, I think. Safety. Where do you have diner safety when you have a structure that can go down in 5 minutes? Or even on the sidewalks. There's no safety language in here, and none has been placed before us. I love the idea of sidewalk cafes, and the roadways are running piggyback on the sidewalk. Sidewalk cafes, we see them in France, we see them all over the world, all over Europe, and in Latin America as well. But this is really the roadway is a major concern. Parking. Parking is a huge problem in this community, and it takes up an entire street. It's not just here on Riverdale Avenue. Go to 60th Street between Madison Avenue and 5th Avenue, which is where I was about 3 hours ago, all right? There is a roadway cafe from Madison Avenue all the way up to 5th Avenue. And that major street, 60th Street, where buses traverse, has no room. You have a traffic jam every single day, as you do on 59th Street in that area. You have an issue of jurisdiction. With respect, if you're going to have a cafe, a restaurant that has regulatory controls, it has to be somebody that has an understanding of that, has an understanding of what it takes to run a restaurant, to provide service to the public, that has a concern. We don't see that with DOT. DOT, for example, owns the sidewalk between 250th Street and 246th Street. It never cleans it. It never repairs it. It never repairs the retaining walls alongside of it and makes believe it doesn't happen, even though the community board has written to them as recently as this week. It ignores it, and yet it's the owner. That's no way of doing this. Now, I've spoken too long and I apologize for that, but I feel very strongly on it based on 10 years of experience at DOT, at MTA, seeing how this kind of thing impedes traffic. Whose hands are up?
Actually, Mr. Chair, I think those are excellent points that you raise, and I actually do have answers for some of them. So if you just permit me, I like to go point by point. With respect to the roadway question that you had, DOT already has, independent of the sidewalk cafe program, we already have roadway seating. This was before the pandemic. We already had a program, which I had alluded to in the presentation, called Street Seats, where we allow for seating in the parking lane adjacent to the restaurant. So that actually is already permissible under city law and under the zoning. It's the sidewalk component.
What is permissible? I'm sorry.
Our Street Seats program.
You're talking about a sidewalk cafe. There's
Well, no. So what we call it is a street seats, or we will remove parking from the parking lane in front of an establishment and have that space dedicated for seating for the public.
Oh, so in other words, you will embed the requirement of no parking in front of any restaurant that wants it.
Well, not necessarily, because this goes to my second point, is that we do not envision that the permanent program is going to look like this temporary program. This temporary program, as you alluded to.
I'm afraid of.
Right, no, but we don't necessarily agree that the emergency program that is in place today is what we want to see going forward, in part because of the issues that you raised. So, Fernando, can you go back to, I believe it was slide 10 of the presentation? Yes. So this, I know, no, one more, slide 10, please. Yes. So we are in the process, and this is going to take considerable amount of time. And we expect to use, you know, a good chunk of next year and part of 2023 to not only develop rules, but also to bring them out to the public for comment and review. But one of the things that we believe is an absolute must for any permanent program is that there has to be a standardization of what seating in the roadway looks like, meaning that there have to be clear, concrete standards that every restaurant has to follow throughout the city, no matter where they are. This slide, I think, alludes to the bare minimum that we expect that the roadway seating will require, but this doesn't preclude other requirements that they should have. And we welcome any suggestions or comments that you may have about what should be a requirement should a restaurant apply for roadway seating.
Commissioner, you have been most cooperative individually with the Traffic and Transportation Committee over the years. But part of the problem that has happened is, in the most recent example of the Meshulla Parkway area, they went to great measures to try and deal with that. The DOT just threw it right out the window. How do we know that just welcoming it doesn't also include putting it under the welcome rug?
Well, that goes to another issue I want to address, which is enforcement. A big reason why I think there has been this sort of hodgepodge of various different, you know, sidewalk cafes, roadway cafes throughout the city over the past year is that, you know, we don't really have a dedicated enforcement arm. As part of DOT's rulemaking process, and also as part of creating a permanent program, we are going to create a dedicated enforcement arm for this program. Right now, what we've been doing is we've been pulling inspectors from our sidewalk inspectors, our roadway inspectors. We've been pulling inspectors from DOB. Under a permanent program, all enforcement will be housed under DOT. There'll be a dedicated unit that'll do it. And this sort of system now, where we just issue warnings and then eventually issue a cease and desist, will be replaced by a system of fines and removals. So whereas
in other
right
words,
now,
there would be additional bureaucracy, additional payroll, additional cost. And you were sort of concerned about cost when I raised it before in another context.
there would have, in order for, well, I would say that there's a cost right now because we're having our current personnel stretched too thin. In order for a program to work, there needs to be a dedicated enforcement team and a dedicated team at DOT that could process these applications, inspect them, and also, issue whatever penalties that we may need to if restaurants are non-compliance.
You have any more, sir?
Yes, and then lastly, the portion about the winter, and I apologize if I wasn't clear. The permanent program, we do not want there to be structures in the roadway during the cold winter months. I'm expecting that, at least at the bare minimum from November to March, we would not allow the structures. The waiver process would be a very limited case-by-case process in the event that there is hardship. But, we still haven't created the standards yet. We haven't really created the standards yet for any of this. This is something that we're going to be working on over the next year.
You seem to be emphasizing a point I made at the outset. Let's see if we can agree. You have a great deal of work still to do in terms of regulations, standards, design, staffing, and the like. The existing regulation, the existing emergency declaration gives you the right to do this through 2022. Why do we need to rush to adopt this in the twilight hours of this administration when we could do it in the next administration when you've had some time to do the job?
We are operating on the assumption that the emergency declaration will continue to allow the program, which is why we expect the program will continue to 2022 and 2023. But right now, the soonest that we can create a permanent program is 2023 because of all the steps that we laid out today. And I could defer to city plan.
Why don't we just turn this down without prejudice to renewal in 2022, when you've had some more time to look at it?
I think it could turn into city planning for that. I think our concern is that any delay now means that we push out the date for when this becomes a permanent program as opposed to this temporary program.
Don't you agree with me that one of the things that DOT and the poly was famous for was forethought rather than afterthought? And here's your chance to plan. And theoretically, that's the function of city planning, is to plan, not just simply to belch it forth on the hour.
Well, again, I think it's important to note the proposal that is in front of us, or the community board today, is specific to the sidewalk cafe, and it is really removing the requirements in zoning to.
Juton, you can't hide the roadways behind the sidewalk. There's much to commend the sidewalk.
There's nothing in the zoning does not regulate the streets. So there's nothing in zoning about being within the street, and this is within a map street. So I understand that you want to talk about it holistically, the program, and that's great. But specifically, the text amendment that is before the community board is specific to the sidewalk cafes.
All right, let's hear from somebody else. Marty?
Contrary to our chairperson, I have very little confidence in DOT having any interest of what the community thinks or doesn't think. I'm still waiting for a response from a letter I sent on behalf of the board to DOT to your office last year concerning District 8 in Manhattan and Board 8 in Manhattan concerning ignoring their wishes and concerns with the bicycle path. And lo and behold, we get one on us without concern for the input from our community board. So I thank you for your non-response. With respect to this, I wonder, you've mentioned several times community input. I'd like to know what that means.
Well, in terms of the rulemaking process, the city has to follow a CAPA, which means that any rule that is issued by a city agency has to be published in the city record. We have to hold a public hearing within a set period of time. I believe it's at least 60 days. But we envision that the public comment and public input will go beyond CAPA. We're going to want to have presentations to the borough boards, presentations to the community boards, the ability for New Yorkers to comment on our website, and also, of course, meetings with the city council. Actually, with regards to your letter, I want to apologize for not responding sooner. I believe the letter was sent to us this year, not last year. But regardless, it's at least 6 months overdue. I do apologize for the delay. I'll make sure that the response is sent out to you pretty quickly because we did work on a response to your letter.
Thank you. So when it comes to selection of a cafe, an outdoor restaurant, the community board will not have public input at that point. You will make the final decision.
That is, well, no, so that is still to be determined. We need to, as part of the review process, we need to figure out where the community board's role in individual applications will be. That has not been determined yet.
Well, as the chairman pointed out, Johnson Avenue, while there are some very lovely cafes there, it's an obstacle course. I think pedestrians are a danger because so much of the street is taken up by outside cafes. So there's no foresight. If people are self-certifying and putting up cafes where they think it's appropriate for them, it's not necessarily in the best interest of the inhabitants, of the neighbors, of pedestrians walking on the street. Forget about driving through there. Thank you.
And I would completely agree with you. The self-certification that exists today is because of the emergency nature of the program. A permanent program would not be self-certification, would create clear guidelines as to and I mentioned this earlier, as to how much space a sidewalk cafe can occupy on the sidewalk and how much space has to be left open for the public.
Rosemary?
Chuck,
Yes, David.
Nick and
Give me a
I
minute.
are before.
I will take you next. I have Rosemary because she has been working on this in terms of putting pieces together.
Oh, okay. David, is that okay? Listen, what am I gonna do?
Yes,
Is
no,
that-
I will defer to the two of you. That's fine.
Okay, okay. So this is bifurcated. This I understand is bifurcated. So let's deal the first with the unenclosed cafe, which the text is before us, but I have not seen the text yet. So it would be good to see the text. It would have been useful. There was a map that you put up, city planning put up, that showed where the cafes are currently, where they are currently. I mean, seeing the whole city is, okay. Now, that shows where they are. That does not show where the text will allow them to be in the future. Am I correct? I think I am in saying you are removing the restrictions so that outdoor sidewalk cafes can be in every residential neighborhood. If that is correct, then this map is not a fair reflection of what the proposal is for the unenclosed sidewalk cafes. I don't, neither I'm in favor or not in favor. This is not a clear reflection of what is in front of us. Residential areas are, and I will tell people, I did look at the map that shows where they're restricted, and outdoor cafes come to the community board for review. So kind of two questions. All the residential areas should be shown on a map so everybody understands what we're looking at, what your proposal really is. And number two, an answer to the question, will you still come to the community board for unenclosed sidewalk cafe approvals? That's
To the first part of your question, Rosemary, about the residential area. So, restaurants are not permitted in residential districts today. So outside of a restaurant that has been grandfathered because it was there pre-1961 and it has remained in existence, there would be no new restaurants that would be permitted.
Again, I'm gonna, this is disingenuous.
You're certainly
What is restricted today will be unrestricted tomorrow. The map should show what is now unrestricted. That's my point, okay? You have restrictions today. People can go to the map and see where they're allowed. Very, very few places. You are now opening it up. It would only be fair to put that on a map so people on this community board could see where it will now be allowed. Whether they like it or don't is not my issue, but it's only fair to be transparent with the people in this community. And number two, does the proposal say that, as in the past, approval of these cafes will come to the community board? Those are my two principal questions.
Understood. And I was trying to answer the first part of your question, Rosemary, which is, again, that we're not being disingenuous. We're just stating the fact that in a residential area, you would not be able to have a restaurant unless it was an existing restaurant. So there would be no sidewalk cafes unless it was an existing restaurant. So anywhere there's an existing restaurant or within areas that permit new restaurants would be places where a sidewalk cafe could occur.
I understand the words, the map, again, I don't know how to say this more clearly. This is not a fair presentation of what your proposal is. That's all.
Well, we can disagree with that.
Mhm,
certainly.
that's fine, good. Mhm. And will the,
The second point I can answer, hi, Rosemary.
No,
So the,
it's not, this is not a DOT issue. Why is this a DOT
no,
issue?
but
The second part is DOT.
actually.
Yeah.
It is a
Oh,
DOT issue
it's no
because,
longer city planning, now it's DOT. Okay, go
well,
ahead.
because we envision that the future sidewalk cafe program will be administered by DOT, not by the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection, the way it is administered today. And as I stated earlier when speaking to the chair, we have not yet, as part of the rules, because we're still in the beginning of creating the rules for this, we have not determined how exactly the role the community board will play with individual applications. That is yet to be determined.
I can predict. I bet you I can predict.
No, it says you don't have to. You've already told us by saying you haven't decided, you're still contemplating it. You actually have told us what your decision is. I will tell you.
That's actually
on
not
this-
true.
On this community board, I have seen many applications come, and the care with which these applications are taken has very much to do with the residential neighborhoods that they are adjacent to, the potential noise, how late are these institutions or these restaurants open, how close to residential areas. We take great care in looking at those applications. It would be a huge mistake to take community review away from that. Okay. I just have to finish with the roadway, even though it's not in front of us, but I don't know how to say it more clearly. It is, this has not been thought through. This was done for the pandemic. It is totally appropriate. We love our restaurants. We love our commercial places. They should continue. We care about that. That is why this program went in with not a word of opposition. It is in existence for another year or more. Let that play out and really plan. If you want to make this permanent, there is planning that you haven't even begun to touch, not even begun to touch. The design of these things, you can tip your hat to saying we're going to do design. The design for the bus stop shelters took years to accomplish. For the newsstands, years to accomplish. For seating, for the bicycle thing, for Link NYC, for all of the things that sit on public property. It took years to do appropriate design. These things are sitting in public property and they deserve to have that kind of attention. I worry about safety. I worry about things like drainage. You know, streets are there. You showed a picture of the snow, right? You can't remove the snow. You take the flood that we had yesterday. Streets are crowned so that the water comes and runs down to the curb and it hits the curb and it goes down to the sewers. That is the design of our streets. When you come and put structures there to stop the drainage, to change the drainage, that's just one issue that has to be taken into consideration. And I have not heard a word of it. I do not see detail, any detail attended to when it comes to all the issues associated with building structures in the street, in the roadway. So I love our restaurants. Let them stay there. Let's see what happens over the next year. But what you're planning, you're not planning well enough for it. it needs more
Well,
planning.
Well, no, and
David.
you're absolutely right. We do need more planning, and we do expect to come to the board, I hope next year, with a draft proposal for what the requirements for roadway seating would be in the future. But, you know, this presentation tonight was not to say, okay, we have a roadway proposal ready to go. This is really the first step in the process. We still have to come back to you in order to show these will be the design criteria that we will require of restaurants for roadway seating. This is what we're asking. This is how the application process will work. This is how the community review process will work. And this is how the enforcement will work.
But you see, Navardo, the way it's being presented is we have come to the conclusion roadway dining is good. We're going to do it. Now we're going to figure out how we're going to do it. It should be exactly the opposite. It should be exactly the opposite. What are the things that we need to consider before we say that roadway dining can be done? It's just,
well, I think that
the planning process is ass backwards. It just really is.
Well, we're just to be fair, Rosemary, we're not approving anything permanently right now. We've stated that the emergency program is going to stay in effect. It will only be once there is a permanent program in place, meaning once the rules are not only passed by law, but also entered into the city rulemaking process. It is only at that point that establishments will be able to apply under the new rulemaking process.
Mr. Chair, respectfully, there are 6 more hands up. Can we move to the next speaker?
Okay, Camelia.
Camelia, please.
I was just going to say, I'm going to stop here. I went on too long. I apologize. It's time for other people to speak. Just a final statement. Your street seats program was, I think, designed only for underutilized streets, underused streets, and not for all streets. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
David Gelman.
Yes, thank you. I have 2 very serious issues about this that I don't think that it can be overcome for this permanent plan, but I want to preface it by saying, 1, I love alfresco dining. 2, I was the first one last year at economic development to say that restaurants have really taken in on the chin in the early stages of COVID. And that I felt that we had to provide them some degree of flexibility so they could survive. And 3rd, our job at the community board is to be fair to all elements of our community. Having said that, the street cafes are used about 6 or 7 hours a day, 6 or 7 o'clock at night till 1 or 2 in the morning, something like that. But they take up their spaces 24/7. And therefore there's no parking for retail stores during the day, and there's no parking for neighbors at night. I don't think that's fair to the rest of the community. And secondly, in terms of the residential areas, and I can give one concrete example of Bailey Avenue at 238th Street. There are a couple of restaurants in a 1-story block across the street. And you know, they make their noise and all that sort of stuff, but there's several residences right across the street from there. And I do not think that it's fair that the noise and smell that used to be contained within the restaurants are now going to affect the residential buildings. And basically, you're going to hear the noise of a restaurant, which always happens realistically. And I'm not actually complaining about it, but you will hear that in the apartments in that vicinity. Having said that, I am dramatically opposed to a permanent move. I have no problem whatsoever with this extension through next year because the restaurants are still trying to recover during this COVID period. But COVID will end, knock on wood, someday. And then those sidewalk and street cafes should also go back to normal. And actually sidewalk cafes, I find they interfere with walking on the sidewalk. And a very good example is Applebee's near Target. That's all I got to say. Thank you.
Nick, I'm going to go to current members of land use, if I may. Bob Bender.
Thank you, Chuck. Yeah, I have a couple of questions myself. And I speak as someone who was in the minority that supported the plan for Marshall Avenue, which has been mentioned, and which has turned out precisely as DOT predicted it would, and some of us on the board predicted it would, where the trucks and the cars are parking where they always used to, bicycle lane or not. But that aside, I do have a couple of questions where I'm totally confused by the discussion that we're only approving sidewalk amenities for the restaurants, when in fact we've seen slides about what's going to happen in the street. And that's the issue that concerns most of us on the board, I believe. I think that's fair to say. So I'm lost in the technical detail here about how we're only approving one thing when we're actually spending most of our time talking about something else. It's the streetscape that is the real issue here. And I feel, as several of my colleagues have already said, that this was set up to benefit the restaurants, which were in dire condition, as we know, and many of them have gone out of business nonetheless. And it caused inconvenience, it caused loss of parking, it caused problems for pedestrians as well. But there was a higher purpose served here in providing jobs for people in the restaurant industry. Before we make this permanent, I think we really need to see how things are going to play out over the next year. And we already have this program in effect for another year. It seems to me premature to go ahead and approve something that could be in existence for 10 or 20 years into the future. I'm also concerned about the issue, and I asked this as a question, I don't know the answer, that if these structures are to be dismantled in the winter so that the streets can be plowed and and the streetscape can revert to what it normally is, I really wonder how cost effective this program is going to be for the restaurants if they have to put up the structure every spring and take it down at the beginning of the winter. So I have a lot of questions and a lot of reservations, but my primary one, quite frankly, is I just don't see the urgency of the situation right now, why we need to act now and not act 6 months or even a year from now. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Dan Paternotte.
I'm going to echo some of those, Chuck, and even Bob just now. There is no rush to do this. There's not. And we don't have enough information right now because we don't have a thoroughly vetted plan in front of us. What I'm also not hearing tonight is a thoroughly vetted plan with outreach and more input from the merchants. And Bob, you just spoke about it. We don't even know if this is, worth it for some of the merchants if they can't keep up these structures in the winter. No reason to do this right now, Chuck, other members who stated it, and there's not enough information. And one other point, I don't think DOT should be the enforcement arm here. I don't think they have the resources to do it. That's it, I'll end there.
Damaris. Thank you, Dan. Damaris, are you there? Are you on?
Sorry. Actually, I just had a question about the sidewalk zoning text change. I think it was one of the slides listed. I just wanted more specifics about it.
Damaris, you're not coming through very clearly. Hello? Am I the only one having trouble with it?
I'll send Dio a message that she wasn't that clear, but I think you can go
All
on
right.
to.
I'll come back to her. Nick? Nick
Thank you,
Faz-
Chuck. Thank you, Chuck. First, I just want to commend Fernando for his data gathering on in our district, and I have a few questions that pertain to it. First, do we have and I've seen this number citywide, whereby the Open Streets, Open Restaurants program has cost the city less than 0.3% of the city's parking. Do we have a comparable number by district in terms of what this entails in terms of lost parking?
There's an issue here, Nick. It's 3% of illegal parking.
Right, less
Oh,
than, it's 0.3%.
My point is the
0.3%.
calculation was made in terms of where there is available parking at that time of day or night. So that's the hedge in there.
So, okay. So Fernando, do you have data on that, or is that something that's in the works? Is that something that you're working on?
I do not have data exactly related to parking, but I could see if there is that data and present that to you.
And then in terms of the timeline and the urgency for doing the text amendment now, maybe Jutan can help us out with this. Why is this, to Dan's point, what is the urgency here, and why is it important for us to do this now and not wait for us to get some more of these details and some of these sort of some of the mitigation of some of the externalities of this program that I think people are pretty much overwhelmingly for, just looking at the way the customers responded. The residents are certainly in favor of it. But in terms of mitigating some of the externalities ahead of time, why is it important that we do this text amendment at this point?
Sure. No, thank you for the question. And I think that what the text amendment does is it's very specific to the sidewalk cafes, and it's removing the zoning regulations of the sidewalk cafes, because the mayoral executive order basically is the enforcement guide for, it's superseding the zoning rules during this time. So the idea is that the zoning text would not be applicable any further, because we have the executive order, and then at some point in the future, the Department of Transportation will have their plan and enforcement and regulations. Once they go through the other CAPA processes and other things, that would then be the new enforcement mechanism for the sidewalk cafes. So, separating again the street program from the sidewalk cafe program, which is what the essential text amendment is that we're actually presenting today, is that we're really removing something because the mayoral override or the executive order is superseding it, and then we don't think that it would be needed anymore once DOT takes over.
I
Thank
believe.
you. And just one more question, Chuck,
All
just
right.
2 parts. I'm sorry, is sort of the reconciliation between the sidewalk cafe permitting process that's in place now and an extension of the Open Streets program. What is for those of us who don't know, what is the sidewalk cafe permitting process? Where does the community board get to have its input? And do you foresee this being something that will be similar if the program is extended? To whoever can answer that question.
Go ahead, Fernando.
I can, so as mandated by the city charter, community boards will still review restaurant applications and for sidewalk cafe licenses. It is expected that once a restaurant applies to DOT for a license for a sidewalk cafe, DOT will review it to make sure the application is complete. And then it will go to the community board for review prior to the restaurants receiving a license. This is what I believe will be in place.
We should hedge on that a little bit, just because, while we think that is what is being proposed, that isn't necessarily the rules at this point, right? Like as Navarro said, the full plan has not been presented, and we do plan on, or DOT plans on coming back to the community boards to present all those details in the future and how that could look for referrals.
If I understand what you just said, that the question of what role, if any, community boards, borough presidents, anybody would have by way of input has not yet been determined. That can change. It can be provided for some. Let me tell you a story. For 10 years, we tried to make sure that before bus lanes were changed, local community boards would have at least a say. And for 10 years, the people who were running it said, we're thinking about it. We'll talk to them after we've adopted it. That finally changed so that there was community input and there was rationality. What you're proposing is a game of hide the pea. It's as simple as that. It's the same game they play in Times Square. Dear Maris.
I think that, Chuck, that's a great recommendation that you could put into whatever you end up proposing, recommending, is that the community board needs to continue to have input even when Department of Transportation has taken over the program.
Dear Maris, are you there?
Yes, hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I just had a question. One of the slides that actually, that Fernando had up that had the actual textual changes, I had a question about that. I don't know if you can put it back up, but it was talking about widening sidewalks. I just wanted clarification on what that was referring to exactly. Yeah, there it is. Oh, yeah. So just, could you just explain that a little bit better? About removing the rules around enclosures and et cetera?
So, I mean, essentially, these are the details of what is in the zoning text that we're changing, which is part of the Sidewalk Cafe program. So Article 1, Chapter 4 is the current Sidewalk Cafe program in our zoning resolution. It has a number of things that they have to do in order to provide a sidewalk cafe. Essentially, we are removing all of that language in this text amendment that we're proposing. It is also removing some language regarding some special districts. It is, I was making sure I'm reading this. It's been a while. So I mean, this is basically just the specifics of what is in the text amendment.
Okay, so they won't have to have operable windows or widen a sidewalk. A sidewalk can be any width.
So under the current executive order, that actually I want to change it. Under the DOT proposal, there will be very specific guidelines similar in some way to what is in the zoning resolution, but they could be different. I don't want to speculate on the details of what those would be.
When will the actual language that's being, so when will the actual details be available and where?
Navardo, if you could.
Just
So, yeah,
just deleting entire chapter 4.
So what's going to happen is that we're not, the new rules will be in DOT's rules that won't be in the zoning text amendment. What we can say, and actually we do have a slide that talks about sidewalk widths. I believe it was I want to say it was slide 8. Or maybe not.
No, I mean, so there is the
so actually that's
clear path requirements.
The presentation, it was something that I just discussed. Yeah. So we at a bare minimum for sidewalk cafes, an establishment has to provide 8 feet, an 8-foot path on the sidewalk at all times. So if they have a sidewalk cafe, if they have a sidewalk and their cafe does not allow for 8 feet, we would not allow it in most cases. In certain places with high pedestrian traffic, the minimum would be at least 12 feet.
So that's the proposal. That's for the future. That's not current. You're saying that's what it's going to be?
Well, currently under the emergency program, we're requiring that all establishments provide a minimum 5 feet of sidewalk clearance, which is the minimum in the ADA.
But it will be 8 feet.
At a minimum in the future.
And that's actually in line with what the zoning resolution says today, where there's a minimum of 8 feet. So if you have an 8-foot sidewalk, then there could be no sidewalk cafe even in front of a restaurant. But if there's a 12-foot sidewalk, then there could be a sidewalk cafe of up to 4 feet, for example. So that's essentially how the rules work today. And we assume that there would be some version of that that would continue in the future under DOT's program.
And that's only applies to the side, that's just 8 feet of sidewalk. You're not adding in the roadway, you know, if they choose to do a roadway extension or something.
Correct. Yeah, that has nothing to do with the
No.
roadway
Okay.
portion, just the sidewalk portion.
Okay, thanks.
Camellia?
Yeah, and that's something we know right now. I could say with very extreme certainty that those minimums are going to hold, that we're going to, you know, in certain streets that are not that busy, the minimum is going to be 8 feet. Or, you know, half the distance, half the length of the sidewalk, whatever is greater. So let's say you have a 20-foot, let's say you have a 20-foot sidewalk, the minimum would be then 10 feet.
Commissioner, let me ask you a question. Are there any drafts of regs for design or for structural safety or the like yet? Any drafts?
We don't have a draft ready. What I can do is I will have to get back to you and speak to the team at DOT that's working on this. And I can
Sure.
get back to the board with a reasonable time frame as to when we would be able to show you what the draft proposal for roadway cafes would be.
All right. Camellia?
Yes, thank you. 3 quick points. I think both Nivardo and Juton may have useful contributions if possible. So one, on the timeline you presented, Nivardo, on the transition between the current kind of ad hoc program to the future permanent one, I didn't see a point of enforcement in terms of really removal of the many structures that were literally built, clearly defying any compliance with even the current regulations and clearly defying compliance with future. But I mean, structures that people, restaurant owners invested a lot of money on, and frankly, there are times when they're really a public transportation hazard. So I think it would be useful to insert that point of in the future versions of these presentations of really DOT enforcing removal of pre-existing structure. Point number 2, in your
Camellia,
proposal,
before you,
yeah,
oh,
go.
let me actually answer that. So we envision that there will be a lengthy transition between when the rules are published and when they go into effect, to give restaurants a significant amount of time to either remove something that won't be in compliance or to modify their structure so that it will be in compliance. So it's not as if, you know, the rules go into effect on one day, the rules are published one day, they go into effect the next day, and then you have like no time to make the changes. We expect there to be a significant transition between the current system and the old system, because a lot of, I expect that a lot of structures that are in the roadway are not going to be in compliance.
Yes, great. Okay. So a significant amount of time for transition. My point number 2, you're basically proposing now basically removal of text, right? But, and you said in your, even on your slide, you say allowing all restaurants to be able to obtain this outdoor permits. But there are areas that are clearly non-conducive to open dining. I mean, situation where infrastructure itself, even though there may be a restaurant there on the sidewalk, I mean, it clearly makes no sense or creates, again, situations of congestions. I'm thinking about a very specific location, for example, right there, the location we discussed today, it's Broadway with 230th. There is a restaurant there. It's right next to the post office. It's right under the elevated. A lot of food traffic, bus traffic. There is a lot of postal trucks parking right there, and then you have this little spot of outdoor dining. I mean, it just simply, it looks like, and there's an area known for congestion, accidents, access to Deegan, etc., etc. So I'm just wondering if it would make sense for DOT, instead of saying all restaurants and we will allow all of them to set up in certain conditions, if there are particular intersections in challenging infrastructure situations that are really not conducive to this, and this would be kind of no areas, right? To put a restaurant, you know, right there when the road splits in 5 and there is an elevated train and there's a history of traffic issues and all these things. Just an input for your consideration. And then
I
finally,
think that's a good point that, you know, we could and when creating the new rules and when creating new guidelines, factoring in those factors that you mentioned, such as, you know, distance to an intersection, the type of intersection, you know, what the traffic, what the roadway configuration is. So that is something that, you know, again, as we develop, and we'll come back to you to show, hey, this is what we think our rules will be. That's definitely a good comment that we should take into consideration.
Great, thank you so much. And then my final point, if I understand, on the table right now for us, it's simply removal of text that was previously legalizing the notoriously difficult to get sidewalk cafe permit. This is on the table right now. Removal of text.
No.
Can I
It's
please finish my question,
replacement.
Chuck?
It's not removal, it's replacement.
Can I please finish my question, Mr. Chair? And then they are free and
Go
able to
ahead.
correct me.
Go ahead.
Okay,
Go ahead.
so again, my understanding was that on the table right now for us to consider, and community boards in general, is removal of wording legalizing the former street sidewalk cafe permit. Kindly confirm if this is correct. Strictly the removal of that language that would limit the future DOT permanent program, making possible the zoning changes. Can you please confirm? And also, if that's the case, what are the administrative, I mean, community boards will tell you now, we are for, we are against, whatever. What are the future administrative steps of the process from the administration's point of view? Thank you.
Jutan, is it replacement or removal?
So the mayoral override is really the acting legislation right now for sidewalk cafes, or the executive order. I keep saying mayoral override, sorry. The executive order is the legal mechanism right now. So right now, the zoning resolution, while it's in the zoning resolution, it is not necessarily what is in effect. So it is essentially, the proposal is to remove it. It would be replaced, but it is currently being legislated or governed by the executive order.
You're taking the executive order, nullifying it in effect, and we're putting in the new proposed text language.
As kind of the next steps.
Right. Thank you. Jody Colon.
Actually, I have a really quick question for Camelia. Is the restaurant that you were talking about on Broadway the Priya Latina restaurant?
That's correct.
Okay, I'll take a look at it. I hadn't.
Please do. I would be curious.
I want to understand what the issue, what they're doing, because sometimes that can actually help us see things that are problematic when we're trying to write rules for things. So thank you for
again. I don't want to single them out or anything, you know, in a negative way. I'm sure actually they quite comply with the current outdoor regulations, but there are simply situations where, you know, access, you know, next to bus, bus hangers, whatever, for the yellow buses. Now we have right there a post office. There are postal vans stuck there all the time. Right next to it is that famous intersection. It's under an elevated. I mean, just so many issues in that particular location. Nothing wrong with the rest.
Thank you.
Just wanted to clarify.
I understand.
Thank you. Thank you. Jody Colon.
Hello. I jumped in a little bit late. So Jutan, thank you for that clarification. So I just want to clarify that I understand. So the thing that the community board is to vote on is the removal of the zoning tax, but the replacement is not going to be in the zoning text. It's going to be in the yet to be determined DOT proposal. Is that correct?
That's essentially correct, yes.
Okay.
And it would be vetted through the local law and CAPA laws, which would still have to go through a process.
And Navardo, thank you for saying all the things that you were hoping or assuming could be in that proposal, but since it is not drafted yet and there is no text for the rules of the legislation, we do not know. So next point of clarification to make sure I've been keeping up is, rather than have Navardo's team do all of that work, and flesh everything out and then remove the text, which would make more sense because then we'll be like, oh yes, we don't need this anymore. Jutan, you're suggesting that it's just because the executive order that's currently in place makes the text redundant or
It makes
obsolete.
it so it's not applicable.
Okay.
It's being superseded by the executive order.
Right, but that kind of doesn't really make logical sense because the executive orders are emergency orders and they're overriding many other laws. So for instance, there are some of the ADA laws
You want
that
me more, you want,
that
maybe
are-
you want more.
Camelia, please.
So Camelia, so part of it is that doesn't make sense because that's like saying that, any executive order that supersedes laws we should eliminate. Like, for instance, I guess we should eliminate the open meetings law that says that we can't do these meetings over Zoom because the governor's order overrides that. So that doesn't seem like a good enough solid reason to vote to remove the text now before there's a proposal written to replace it, because city planning always tells us the replacement text whenever they're going to remove something. And whether it's DOT doing it or city planning, it just kind of seems to make more sense and would resolve a lot of the issues that I also agree with that the board members have brought up. It would just seem that seeing that proposal fleshed out and us knowing that, oh yeah, this covers all the things that we worked so hard to include in the original zoning text. We don't need that anymore. Let's, yes, let's go forward. So that's my 82 cents on it. And then the last clarification thing, I thought the widening sidewalk phrase was referring to the FAR bonuses that developers get for building and doing setbacks and building in very dense buildings in high traffic neighborhoods, that the widening sidewalks are meant for pedestrian traffic to accommodate the additional pedestrian traffic of that building. And that's why sidewalk cafes are not allowed on them currently under the zoning text. Is that an accurate understanding of the zoning, or did I misread it?
Navarro, you may have a better knowledge of that than I do.
So the sidewalk widths are really going to be about, in our rules, when we draft them, are about telling restaurants, you must always provide X amount of feet on the sidewalk. So as I mentioned earlier, in certain neighborhoods, we envision that to be at a minimum of 8 feet. In more high traffic neighborhoods, that's going to be a minimum of 12 feet. And that's,
and just on that, does that include the 3-foot service lane that they are required to have currently? Is that 8 foot, including the 5-foot minimum ADA and the 3-foot service lane? Or is there an additional 3-foot service lane required?
No, it's simply, it is a flat 8-foot minimum. It is 8 feet at all times have to be clear in order for you to have a sidewalk cafe.
Right,
At least 8 feet.
But does clear include, so I'm not gonna, that's
I
not,
mean, it means
I'm not gonna go
8
back and forth
feet.
because those aren't written yet. So when we see
Yeah,
the
no, but
proposal,
just,
I'll ask you my questions.
Sure,
I
but
just
the
wanted to
8
go
feet-
back.
the 8
I just wanted to go back to the widening sidewalk. My understanding is that is a DCP zoning text term that refers to the FAR bonus that developers get for having an additional setback to provide for the more dense pedestrian traffic. And that currently under the sidewalk zoning that's in place that you're asking us to say, get rid of, that those are not, those wider, widened sidewalks are currently not eligible for sidewalk cafes because their purpose was to remove pedestrian congestion. And my understanding is that's why two community boards, two of the three boards that have already posted their results have said no to it, was because of that. They're in Manhattan, there's high foot traffic, they're in Brooklyn. So that was to what Damaris had asked about sidewalks.
So in those neighborhoods where there is high foot traffic, we want to have a higher threshold for what needs to be clear. So, you know, in high traffic neighborhoods, we would envision at a bare minimum 12 feet. And that's subject to change. You know, it could be that in the course of speaking to community boards, speaking to stakeholders, we may come back and say, well, 12 feet is not sufficient. It needs to be 15 feet minimum. But we do know that in those.
I understand. I understand that doesn't, because I understand that there's no set number because that proposal doesn't exist yet, which is my whole point. If we had that proposal and had reviewed that and held hearings on it, and then were asked to remove the zoning text, I think that process would be more conducive to conversations rather than, oh my God, we hate this. I am a big proponent of outdoor dining. I have chemical sensitivities and cannot sit in an indoor restaurant. So I know every outdoor dining space pre-COVID. This has been like a great party for me to be able to sit outside. So I love this idea, but I do not like the execution, especially since it's feeling to me very much like other proposals what we were given and saying, well, vote on it and then worry about what the actual text will be. So that's just it's a process thing, not a idea, it's a process thing. Navardo's proposal, I believe, should come first. The rules and the text should come first. All those hearings should come first. And then this proposal from DCP to remove the zoning text should come after that. This is just backwards to me. And I don't want to take up more time, but that's just my main comment from what I read on the site and what I've heard from everybody and what I've heard from Fernando and Navardo and Jutan. So, and sorry if I sound cranky, I'm at the end of a horrible sinus infection. So,
Jody, you never sound crazy. You always ladies and gentlemen, I see no other new hands up. At this point, I'm going to put to you a resolution because we are required to vote tonight. Our time within which to vote has expired or will expire, so we must take a position. Accordingly, I will propose.
You're like recording me or something. What are you?
Please, whoever that is, please.
You know, like focus, right? So you don't want to like.
All right. Proposed that the Community Board Number 8 Land Use Committee rejects and disapproves the proposed amendment at this time as premature upon the facts that A, there are a number of questions which the ultimate resolution will summarize from what has been raised here tonight. And the rejection is without prejudice to renewal when the appropriate regulations and implementing measures are presented to us. Do I have a second?
A second.
Doc, I'd like to please do just a roll call of the committee for the vote, if possible.
I'm sorry?
I would just like to do a roll call of the vote of the
Sure.
committee.
Absolutely. Let me just make one point, if I may. I have been terribly rude, but we have had with us the city council member from this community, Eric Dinowitz. Are you still there, Eric? Yeah. Are you there? Lorenzo, I know he was there.
Hello, yeah, I believe he got off a couple of minutes ago.
Okay. All right, I'm sorry. We need to do a roll call. You have a motion, you have a second.
Okay, Chuck Murdler,
Yep. I'm in favor of the resolution.
Marty Wolpoff,
In favor.
Sylvia Alexander,
In favor.
Bob Bender. Bob? Okay, I don't think Bob is on the meeting anymore. David,
Agreed. In favor, sorry.
Rosemary,
Aye.
okay, Dan,
In favor.
Julie,
In favor.
Camelia.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Camelia, that was yes?
That was a nay. No.
Okay. All right, Chuck, thank you.
Okay,
Passes.
the resolution is adopted. I thank you. Let me make a suggestion, Commissioner. It would be useful if you're working on this, if you could meet with, at some early date, a representative of this committee and of the Traffic and Transportation Committee to see where this thing sits, as well as with the Economic Committee, so that you can get a full input and we can get a conversation going with you or any colleague you may designate. Think about that. It may be useful. All right. I don't know, is he still there?
Yes, sorry about that. That does sound like a good idea, and I'll be in touch about what future conversations we can have.
Thank you. I have one more item on the agenda, Riverdale Park, 235th Street, DEP pump station, a SNAD matter. New York City Department of Environmental Protection, among others, seeks an authorization between 105-91 of the SNAD rules to facilitate the replacement of an existing DEC pump station in Riverdale Park at 3869 Palisades Avenue. Is there any discussion? Does anyone wish to be heard on the matter? Are there any hands? I don't see any.
Chuck, EP is here and the council member just returned into the meeting.
Okay, DEP?
Hi, hi, Chairman. We are ready to present on the SNAD application if you would like us to proceed.
Can you do a mini presentation?
Sure. Steve Pierre is the accountable manager for DP's Bureau of Engineering, Design and Construction. And Matthew Ossett is the portfolio manager. And maybe you guys can go through it a little.
Sure, will do. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us present tonight. The good news is your wish came true. The presentation is very short. The bad news is I guess everyone still has to hear it. So again, my name is Steve Pierre. I'm accountable manager for DEP, as Effie mentioned. The purpose of tonight's presentation is for the SNAD, or Special Nature Area District requirements that this project falls under, in particular, the 235th Street pump station. In early July, the DEP submitted a land use application for to the Department of City Planning for the SNAD requirements, and I believe a referral letter was sent to the community board. This evening, I'm going to give a brief overview of the 235th Street pump station, the project, and then discuss some items relating to the SNAD requirements. Next slide. Okay, this slide, you could see on the left side, it's the borough map, New York City. If you could see a red star, that is approximate location of the pump station, Riverdale section of the Bronx. On the right side, closer neighborhood map, that shows you a larger star at that location. Again, the address 3869 Palisade Avenue, and it is within Parks property. Next slide.
Can I ask you a question, if I may?
Yes?
And it's not intended to be controversial, just to get some information. By law, the city cannot alienate park property without legislative approval. Is there an exception for this kind of activity?
Steve, this is, again, good evening, everyone. This is Matthew Osid, also from DEP. The work that we're doing is within the fence line of the existing pump station. And based on my conversations with DEP legal staff, that is not considered an alienation activity. So the property within the fence line is considered to be DEP. However, you are correct, though. Any work outside the fence line would be considered alienation, and there are no exceptions for other public utilities.
You're comfortable with that?
Yes, it's again, I've been working on a handful of pump stations over the last several years. And unfortunately, this is a fairly common activity where we have pump stations that are on non-DEP property. So yeah, yes, I am comfortable.
Good, that's fine. Thank you. Please forgive me for interrupting you. I just wanted to get that out of the way.
Okay, no problem. Pictures on the left side, this is the existing station during the summertime. Picture on the right side is during the winter time without any leaves, and background you can see the Hudson River. And another close-up of the pump station area along Palisade Avenue. And again, it is surrounded by Riverdale Park. Next slide. This slide, we have some information on the existing pump station itself and more or less the scope of work. It was constructed in 1966, approximately 55 years old, and is currently in need for a full rehab. This is a traditional above ground combined pump station. Combined meaning that it takes both storm and wastewater flow. It's standard in that the electrical is above ground in the structure, and it has a separate wet well and dry well below ground. The dry well currently has 2 pumps. We're going to replace it with 4 smaller size pumps for redundancy. I'm not going to go through the full items to make it a shorter presentation.
Can I interrupt? Can I interrupt to make 2 points?
Yes.
You have previously made a presentation to Traffic and Transportation, which endorsed this proposal so that everybody knows this is not your first time at bat. I have a second question for you, which is germane in light of yesterday's events. Have you, in the proposed reconstruction, given consideration to the quote climate change unquote concepts that have come out of city planning with respect to rising water along the Hudson River in terms of possible flood issues?
Yes, for all our pump stations, we incorporate resiliency design. This pump station is a little different. Although they have resiliency and sustainability designs incorporated in it, it is at a very high elevation. So,
and Steve, just to add to that, and Steve, your answer was correct. Just one thing, just for informational purposes, as part of our standard DEP policy for structures like this that have a 50-year life or longer, we add, I think we add 40 inches to the current floodplain for expected changes in climate conditions. So if the floodplain, just picking a number, was 10 feet above the current water level, we would make it 10 feet plus 40 inches so that we would have extra contingency for changes in the floodplain.
Well done, thank you.
Okay, correct. And just to add and close out, everything is going to be gutted out in the station. All new mechanical, electrical, HVAC, plumbing systems, actuators, everything below ground will be replaced. The structure below ground would more or less stay the same. Above ground, we're going to demolish the existing station and put a new above ground structure. I just want to point out that everything will be the same in terms of the footprint and the property line. In addition to the work,
if I may, are you going to have a plan for construction vehicles, those involved in bringing materials and doing the actual work, to be off the road, or what are you going to do with them? Putting them in the park? What?
No, what happens is we will stage, we have equipment staging area in front of the station. That's going to be part of the traffic plan that will be submitted by the contractor. So they will have no items or equipment that is actually going to be within the park itself. Everything will be in front of the station or alongside the road.
Could you forward a copy of that to the Traffic and Transportation Committee, please, when you receive it?
Yes, will do. The contractor still has to submit that plan, but we will.
Thank you.
Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, but that was our key concern when it went before T&T a year ago, was blocking off Palisade Avenue for staging.
Yes, it was staging and then I guess eliminating the two-way traffic, but DEP did come back to us with the traffic folks and they redesigned it so that way there will still be two-way traffic and that they will have a plan to stage the equipment.
Correct. We incorporated that into the contract.
And you will forward a copy of that to T&T, right?
Will do. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Are there any questions on them? Are there any questions? or
Chuck, Laura
concerns?
has her hand up.
Yeah,
Yes, Laura.
I just want to say that in 2018, the ENS committee approved this, and then the full board approved it contingent upon that appropriate traffic plan and flagmen and no closing of streets. So this was a very good collaboration. We do have a copy, initial copy of the whole traffic plan that's being proposed. I have it in my file, but certainly updates, send. But this was a very well thought out project.
And I just want to add, that DOT was very, very helpful. Your concerns were presented to them by us, and they took them into consideration when they let us do the work this way as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Very well. On the motion to approve.
Just one final question, if I might.
Yes, Rosemary, I'm
Okay,
sorry.
so last year we received a number of complaints or issues about erosion on Riverdale, on Palisade Avenue, principally the walkway. And I understand you are clearly not responsible for those issues. However, since you are one of the neighbors that front Palisade Avenue, it is part of your plan to contain your water that comes off your site on your site and not, what should we say, add to whatever erosion problems there are on Palisade Avenue. Does that make sense? Do you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, Steve, I'll take this one because I actually had a conversation with the Parks Department about this issue
Good,
just this week.
good.
We have multiple bureaus within DEP. The bureau that operates the pump station actually did I won't call it an emergency repair, but they did a high priority repair just recently to do some control of erosion. And as part of the project, though, just to answer your question more directly, there's 2 catch basins within the site property line that are being replaced, and those will collect all water within the pump station and treat it at the pump station. We're also putting they call it a water bar. It's really just a very, very small curb at the entrance that will divert the water into the grassy areas of the park's property as well.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being that thoughtful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
On the motion to approve, is there a second?
Second.
Anybody want to be heard on the motion? Hearing nobody. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Contrary minded, unanimously adopted. I thank you. I have 2 minor pieces of additional workforce. You have received copies of the May and June minutes of the committee. I thank Kira and others who worked with her in doing that. Do I have any additions, corrections, or changes with respect to the minutes? Do I have a second to my motion to approve?
Second.
All those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Contrary minded? The motion is unanimously adopted. Is there any old business? Any-
May I just interrupt you? The council member has come back into the meeting.
Eric, give us the pearls of wisdom.
I come to this meeting to get your pearls of wisdom, Chuck. That's why I attend. No, this is, it's always, wonderful to listen to you, especially about the outdoor seating. One of the big concerns that came up when we voted on this, on the outdoor seating, was what it would look like, what the community input would look like. And so it's always great to hear your input and making sure that the city agencies are really listening to the community. I do want to say it is, although I would love to see all of you in person, I am really glad that we are doing this online. As many of you may know, we sent a letter to the former governor requesting that the open meeting law that it be allowed to be virtual because of the Delta variant. We had sent that letter again when Governor Hochul was sworn in, and they passed it. So I'm glad to see that. I'm glad to see that
Am I correct that the resolution to adopt in the assembly was introduced by a man by the name of Dinowitz?
Yeah, it was. yes. Assemblyman Dinowitz introduced. It was part of the eviction moratorium bill. So it was part of the same bill during this special session. So also importantly, I don't think he's on, but importantly, a lot of people are going to stay in their homes. And of course, in the council, again, I think I've mentioned this, but one of the first bills I voted on was the right to counsel and its companion bill, which was sort of an education piece to inform tenants of their rights, especially with respect to right to counsel. I don't want to get too into that now at a land use meeting. I do want to make sure everyone knows, again, my office is open. We are helping people. Please call the office if you have anything. We've been sending out a lot of emails and a lot of tweets about what to do if you've faced problems from Hurricane Ida, whether it's with oil tanks, whether it's with downed trees, electric wires. There's lots of information out there. So if you're not sure what to do, check out our email, sign up for our email list, follow me on Twitter. But always reach out to our office if you need anything. I have a great staff. Enzo Manzano's on this call. He takes care of CB8. A lot of you may know him already. But please reach out to our office if there are any needs you have, and we'll get right on them.
Eric, permit me, while we were talking about the sidewalk cafes and the roadway cafe, I don't think there are any, or if I'm wrong, many people in the community who do not agree that the restaurants are critical to our community and to all the communities in the city, and that they are suffering. May I respectfully suggest some thought be given to giving them some form of tax relief, thereby a saving that allows them to deal with existence. They're in deep doodads. We have sales taxes and other taxes on them. Nobody's saying repeal them. Give them relief for a year so that they can climb back in. The national administration is doing essentially that.
So part of the outdoor seating bill is, or the policy is about their finances, but it's also the type of city that we want to live in. Do we want to live in a city where we have the opportunity to eat outside? What does that look like? How does it impact residents who are just walking down the street, driving, parking? And these are all, again, important details that need to be worked out. And that's why community boards really need to speak up and pass resolutions like you are. Regarding, one of the big things that a lot of our businesses face, yes, there are taxes, but there's also fines. So one of the other bills that I co-sponsored recently was going through, I think the city's going through and eliminating a lot of the fines that our businesses and restaurants face, and a lot of the bills that we're looking at seek to make it easier for businesses, because it's not just about taxes, it's that they are needlessly fined. There was a business, it wasn't a restaurant, it was a corner store that they had charged tax on, I think, a bottle of water, a bottle of rubbing alcohol, and were charged $1,000. And the owner was like, I took over the business from my cousin. I had no idea about this regulation. So really providing a relief in terms of those is also, in terms of regulations, is also very important.
Thank you. Any questions for the council member? Eric, you're superb as always. Thank you very
I
much.
learned from you, Chuck. Thank you.
All right, now, if I may, is there any other old business or new business requiring attention? On the motion to adjourn, do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
All those in favor? Contrary minded? Done.
Aye.
Thank you. The meeting is adjourned.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Night. Night, John Boy.
Thank you, David.
Kira, can you stay for a second? Just a quick question.
Sure.
What was the address that NYPD gave as the current location of their whatever it's called, Special Victims Squad? It was Simpson, but I don't remember the number.
It's Simpson Street. If you just give me 1 second.
Just to figure out kind of the neighborhood, you know?
I think it's inside the 62nd precinct. Oh, no.
Good night,
It's
everybody.
in the 41st precinct.
41st.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh.
I didn't realize
Oh,
it was
sorry.
still on. Good night, guys.
Good night.
Bye.